Chapter 13. The Triwizard Tournament. Chapter text to guest, or Walsachik, whichever you prefer. I'm posting the full series on Wattpad and trying to repost them on here in the meantime. So glad you're enjoying. Thanks so much. James took the book with a happy enough smile. He wanted to believe they were all being paranoid, that this was the year nothing bad was going to happen to his son, and they'd get to have a rousing time laughing about whatever was to come, rather than going for more calming drafts. Lily startled as James screamed like that, then scowled as all four boys started laughing at her expense. "I'm so glad you find people screaming funny," she told them pleasantly. "I'll make sure to remember that later, dear," she finished with flashing eyes at her husband. He gulped, tried and failed for a smile, then went back to the book. Sirius still couldn't wipe the smirk off his face as he stated, "Well, that's just lovely. A very welcome back to school present." "I'm sure it gives students a chance to miss the rain outside," Remus agreed. "Good to see the weather doesn't affect his mood," James snickered. "Ouch," Lily winced in sympathy. "For McGonagall and Hermione," Harry agreed with a sad frown for both women. "Great, now we know who we can use to catch our falls from now on," Sirius snorted. "While technically he is doing something," Remus' smirk kept widening. "He's not wrong," Sirius finished for him, causing all four boys to crack up laughing again. Lily sighed, wishing she could teleport someone sensible into the house at least. She couldn't have at least offered to dry them off. James asked, a wicked grin still in place at his poor son's expense. "Guess she was still too distracted glaring after Peeves to think about it," Harry chuckled, knowing he'd been no worse for wear of the extra cold. "Of course it's his usual," Sirius snorted. "He can't hardly change clothes." "Ah, cheer up, Harry," James said bracingly. "A little water never hurt anyone." "Even when it's chucked at you from a balloon?" Harry asked simply, not bothering to keep the smirk off his face. "Especially then," Remus pointed out, finally getting Lily to laugh at that one. "Thank you for that lovely reminder," Lily snorted. "Blimey, nearly forgot about this one." Sirius raised a brow in surprise. "Be thankful it's only a hello," Harry sighed. "He didn't lose a drop of his enthusiasm for me, but at least he didn't memorize my schedule again." "Well done," Sirius snapped his fingers, his face giving a slight twitch as his tongue seemed to register he'd said the wrong thing, but quickly pushing past that. "I kind of liked your stalker. Did he and Ginny ever start up that fan club?" Harry twitched like he wanted to mimic what he'd seen the others do and chuck a pillow at his godfather, but repressed the urge in the end, while James ignored the two and kept going. "Oh joy, we don't need Ginny anymore." Remus jumped in on this. "We've got our own club right there. So glad you two are enjoying this," Harry sighed, which didn't help the fact that he was trying to ignore them both. "Not necessarily," Sirius said at once with a happy smile. "I'm a Gryffindor, but my brother was a Slytherin. None of us have siblings, so we can't mark it," Remus shrugged. "But no, it's not standard," he finished agreeably. "Identical twins doesn't mean identical personalities," Lily shrugged. "I can just as easily picture Fred or George having wound up in Slytherin." "You take that back," Sirius said instantly, looking as affronted as if she'd cursed at him. "Those two are proud Gryffindors after me own heart." "Oh, hush, Sirius," she waved him off, still addressing Harry. "They're both ambitious and clearly very cunning. It's not too hard to picture." Harry nodded, but decided against arguing the point, as he couldn't picture any of the Weasleys in such a house. "New teacher," the other four said as one. "Can we please get someone normal this year?" James sighed. "Should I resent that?" Remus asked with a wan smile. "You are far from normal, Moony, but that's not what he meant and you know it," Sirius grumbled. They all wanted just one bloody year of peace, and so far every one of Harry's Dada teachers had somehow had a hand in spoiling it. Admittedly, Remus was still the best by far, so hearing the position was open again stung more than they would have expected it to, as they knew who they wanted there. Remus couldn't help beaming, still somehow doubting that he'd done any real good in the position. But when no one else looked remotely surprised, but instead just happy to hear it, Remus decided against bringing up the argument it was best he had left. He'd only cause more trouble. Lily let out a surprised snort of laughter, saying, "That would honestly be kind of interesting. Wonder what they'd do. With any luck, call it a permanent free study period." Sirius sighed wistfully. "I imagine Dumbledore did appoint someone." Remus shrugged. "There must be someone out there who's still willing to try." "I know someone who quit too soon," James grumbled under his breath, still giving his friend the stank eye before continuing. The feeling is mutual, Sirius hissed, to no one's protest. They all wished they were more surprised that he was even still there. It didn't seem fair that he could do that to Remus, and he hadn't suffered his own job as payment. James only got a moment to laugh before saying on reflex, "Harry thought that, I swear." Lily wasn't paying him any attention. Her eyes were vacant and still managed to look more angry than sad at everything Severus had done last year, so James quickly hurried on and managed to ignore Harry grumbling, "Thanks for the bus, Dad." "Buckbeak resents that," Sirius smirked. "You're speaking for a hippogriff that hasn't even been born yet," Remus laughed. "I'm sure many hippogriffs resent that," Sirius' smirk widened. "He's just the first by name I thought of." "I'm sure. Oh, bloody hell, you too." Lily cut them off with a pointed look. "It's just an expression, as you well know. Let James finish this before midnight, will you?" "She's in a bad mood," Sirius mumbled into Harry's ear, low enough that he was sure she hadn't heard. "Those poor dears," Lily crooned, switching back to motherly anxious at once. "I wish someone had at least taken to drying them," causing a burst of laughter in the room. They really hoped he got sorted into Gryffindor now just to hear that. "I love this kid," Sirius said at once. "Considering at least once a week you begged us to go take a swim in that lake with you, I'm not surprised," James chuckled. James looked deliriously happy, not quite being able to believe his luck. He'd been dying to sing along with the hat. James finished with gusto, then looked around expectantly like he was awaiting his applause. What he instead received was laughter from three of them for what they considered far too much enthusiasm, and one actual person clapping, which was Sirius with a straight face. "Lovely performance," his best friend nodded with a critical smirk. "Could have used a bit more volume, but you are out of practice, so I'll let it slide." "Thank you," James nodded seriously, only giving the others another reason to laugh. He ignored them and turned proudly back to this book without a trace of remorse. "Sad that it took you till your 4th year to know that," Sirius sighed. Lily snickered in appreciation and agreement. "It's a good thing they applaud," Remus snorted, "because it's not as if they have them labeled." "Now why would you notice a thing like that?" James asked with two wide eyes. "Can't be because of her Quidditch ability. Harry did beat her last game." Sirius nodded along with an undeserved smile in Harry's opinion. He tried desperately to ignore them both, but his growing redder by the second face wasn't leaving much room for that farce. Lily wanted just as much to hear more about Harry's first crush, but she pitied her son too much in that moment and instead said, "Get on with it, James. No need to pick on him when it took you 3 years to even admit you had a crush on me." James flushed and quickly turned away. "A moment I'd have liked to see him act on," Remus murmured, causing Lily to at least giggle at that. James and Sirius pouted at them as they'd just been told off for this, but James decided against arguing the point. Lily sighed, her earlier amusement soured. She wished Harry would stop thinking of that particular stereotype. "Yes," Sirius cheered. "I wanted to hear about his experience in the lake." "Not so good for Harry," Remus chuckled, "as we might have another Colin this year." Harry sighed without comment, dearly hoping against that. "Did he keep the jacket?" James asked. "No, he gave it back to Hagrid," Harry chuckled. "The giant squid, I presume," Lily smiled. "I love this kid," Sirius cackled. Anyone who had this brilliant reaction was okay with him. "The concern for his brother is touching," James snickered. "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds like a bad thing," Lily giggled. "As if you don't have a million pictures of him hanging up in your room," Sirius said with a pointed look at Harry. Harry was still trying his very best to ignore all of this teasing, hoping they could change topics soon. "Should have eaten more on the train instead of ruining your snacks," Sirius shrugged. "All 3 thanks to my boy," James added on with undisguised pride. Harry flushed again, though this time for a different embarrassment. Only his last year would he actually claim some credibility for, and his whole team deserved the praise. His first 2 years had really been more of a fluke in his opinion. He hadn't asked or earned those points just for doing the right thing. "Why does he attend the start of term feasts if he's just going to watch us like that?" Sirius asked with a roll of his eyes. "I thought they greeted the first years in the antechamber," Harry asked in surprise as he first realized this. "Nick and the others were with us the whole time this year. Your first year seemed to have been some kind of occurrence," Lily shrugged. where they were having a meeting about Peeves and were running late. They usually wait in the great hall with everyone else. Lily had to fight back the impulse to scold him for talking with his mouth full. She found no sense in doing it for how many years ago. Of course, Sirius began laughing at once. He always enjoyed hearing what that poltergeist got up to. I'm glad Nick mentioned that instance in particular. Remus gave a fond smile. I was worried someone would forget about it. Let me guess, Harry began with a happy smile. Right in one, Sirius nodded without remorse. We caused a distraction and let him into the Great Hall, where he started the most epic food fight in Hogwarts history between all of the houses. I had to attend potions with mash still in my hair, Lily sniffed, but her shoulders were shaking with repressed laughter as she finished. But it was worth it when I nailed you with that whole bowl of pudding. She finished with a loving smile at her then boyfriend. I knew you did that on purpose, James said, swinging his finger wildly in her face. Lily had an unrepentant smirk on her face, and still grumbling a bit with a fond smile of his own, James turned back to the book for now. Cause mayhem, Remus said at once with a casual shrug. That is a good idea, though, Sirius nodded along. How come we never thought of getting him into the kitchens? Because you valued your meals more than your life, Lily snorted. You never would have jeopardized such a thing after McGonagall threatened to ban you from the Great Hall after you let Peeves in there. Sirius nodded in agreement with that. Timing, James said with mild disappointment. He'd wanted Nick to keep going. What's with her? Remus asked in surprise. Oh, that's right. She wouldn't know any more than Harry that there were house elves at Hogwarts, Sirius shrugged. And judging by the way she was acting about it over the summer, this might not go down well, Lily sighed solemnly. She now felt bad for her earlier outburst at Sirius, and she'd already seen evidence that Ron and Hermione might rehash the argument they just had. Where did she think all that food came from? James snorted in surprise. She knows the only staff there are the teachers. Guess it just never occurred to her to question it, Lily shrugged. She'd been the same way for the longest time. I just love that you and your friends don't even try what we strived for, Sirius sighed. It took me ages to get him to laugh so hard his head fell off. All 5 of them looked worriedly surprised at that. Was she going to refuse to eat her whole stay there? Only Lily felt sympathy for the girl rather than wanting to laugh at the display like clearly the marauders wanted to. At least she understood why Hermione was behaving like this. You know she's really making a point when she ignores the desserts, Remus said solemnly. Is she going to be like that every meal now? James sighed. It'll be a miracle if she even attends another meal, Sirius shrugged. Killjoy, Remus pouted. Can't believe it took him that long to add those, Sirius snickered. My personal favorite, James cackled. And he's memorized every one of them, Lily said with chipper. There'll be a line out the door for that, Harry muttered under his breath, which James and Sirius still heard, and exchanged indulgent smiles, more than happy Harry was playing along. Cannot imagine why, Remus said with an almost straight face. At least I didn't have to deal with that last year, Harry sighed. That was one thing he could be grateful for at least. James had been happily reading for so long that this bombshell didn't quite register until he heard Sirius gasp so wildly you'd think he'd been stabbed in the chest. You must be bleeding joking, Remus demanded, watching James like he wasn't sure who he was staring at anymore. Tell me that was a terrible joke. I'd never joke about something like this. James yelped, staring down at the print like it had just whacked him over the head with his own broom. I don't understand. Sirius' lower lip was starting to wobble, like he was going to start crying any second. He can't, Dumbledore can't. Oh, come on, you lot, Lily sighed, finally cutting in. Read on now, and let the man give an explanation as to why you know he will. A completely appropriate reaction, Remus nodded, ignoring Lily rolling her eyes at him, though Harry still looked as stunned at the news as the rest of the boys. They weren't the only ones, Harry sighed, somehow getting the feeling he would have preferred Quidditch to whatever was going on this year. It's a good thing Wood hadn't come back this year, or he would have had heart failure, Lily couldn't help but point out with a light giggle. Unless you plan on cancelling all classes this year and giving everyone a free year, I cannot see in what way taking out Quidditch is all right, Sirius huffed. Oh, bloody hell. James groused, though admittedly his eyes did light up with curiosity now. The timing of whoever interrupted this should get an award, Lily snorted. So the reason they cancelled Quidditch has something to do with this big secret. Remus' eyes glowed with curiosity now. Must be really big. Sirius ran his hand through his hair in frustration. Harry let out a strangled noise as well, his eyes getting wider the longer this man was described. Who on earth? Lily began with confusion, but James shrugged, clearly indicating none of them had any idea, so kept going. James couldn't help a little shiver for this man, wondering what on earth he'd been through to get like this. Sirius' mouth was stretching wide, the idea of that thing a combination of creepy and kind of cool, leaving him unsure how he was supposed to be reacting. No way, Remus demanded, his eyes narrowed shrewdly at the book. That's your new Dada teacher. As he's there for some other reason, which I can't think of, Lily agreed. Why can't you just have one normal teacher? James sighed. Hey, Remus yelped, giving a half-hearted glare at him. You saying I'm not normal? Mooney, I know you're not, Sirius snorted, waving James on amidst the others giggling. What? Harry just nodded absently, though, like the news didn't surprise him one bit. What he was thinking on, though, was this odd little feeling, like he shouldn't trust this man one little bit. It was so at odds with his first impression of him, though, a trustworthy man. Why would he have such conflicting feelings about this? That's not. Sirius shook his head wildly as he tried to line up the aura in his prime now with this misshapen thing. No way, that's Alistair Moody. James was going nearly green in shock as he reread that almost terrifying description. Sure, he's been pretty badly marked, but the eye, leg, and nose. Who on earth managed to get him? His head was reeling as he tried to wrap his mind around that. Moody was like his idol. He couldn't imagine a more fearsome and undefeated aura, and to hear something like this had happened to him was crushing. Lily felt terrible for him, of course, but suddenly she was looking at her husband with a whole new fear as well. She had never argued with him when he said he wanted to be an aura. In the type of life they lead fighting a war, it almost made sense this was where he'd been leading. But for the first time, she truly reflected what it would feel like if her husband didn't come home one day because he hadn't lived through one of those injuries. She was already facing a terrifying future where her and James were set to die. But what if they somehow managed to fix it, and James only got a few more years left of life, but still died because of this? Her heart felt like it was shriveling up in her as she so desperately wanted to throw this at James, for the first time try, and convince him of something else, but wondering if she even should. Was it right to try and force him to change careers just because she was getting a little spooked? Still stuttering slightly from this future sucks overload, James had to blink hard a few times before forcing himself to go on. He hated sitting here thinking about this happening, but glancing over at Harry was a good reminder it wasn't the most important thing in his life right now. I'd be too shocked to as well, Lily murmured, still shifting her weight around with unease. Guess now we get the name, Remus grumbled to himself, his brow still furrowed up in worry for this future. It was honestly beginning to feel like no one in their future from the Order lived a decent life, which wasn't exactly encouraging. Just Alistair Moody as a teacher. Sirius' eyes still hadn't gone back down to their normal size. I can't decide what's blowing me more, the thought of him doing that, or him with half his nose missing. Or that I, or James reached around Harry and gave his best friend a pat on the shoulder in commiseration. He was still fairly in shock himself. Wish Ron did know when that happened to him. Sirius shivered, wondering if there was an ambush somewhere in their future, or if this happened after Voldemort's downfall. All five of them couldn't help another shiver. It's not as if they'd never met someone with a prosthetic, but the idea of it happening to the head of the Aura department like that still wouldn't sit right in their mind. Not the man who seemed thicker than stone. James had still been reading on autopilot from the shock of Moody's appearance in this timeline, that he'd almost read right past this without realizing it. Then his brain caught up with his tongue, and he nearly bit the muscle off as he shouted, "What? You did not just say that?" Sirius demanded, reaching over and yanking the book away, though the second his eyes landed on the words they still managed to double in size. That's what all this fuss has been about. Lily snorted. I think I'd have preferred to hear about the Quidditch matches. Well, that's a little harsh, Remus laughed. I've heard all about these things, and they sound like a blast. Clearly we haven't heard about the same thing, Lily snorted, several events that ended in deaths first coming to her mind. Harry did not join in the celebration of whatever this meant, but instead felt a cold chill break out over him. This was going to be terrible, of that he had no doubts. Yet his 14-year-old mind was just sort of confused on the topic, and as trying to think on reasons why he wouldn't like this for any time gave him a headache, he instead inserted, "What's that?" "Oh, you're going to love this pup," Sirius smirked. "It's this event where they take students from different schools and pin them against each other in these crazy matches. One year they had Hippoi Athenat." Harry interrupted like Sirius had just spoken Greek. "Fire-breathing horses," he waved off, "and they raced them around this swamp filled with—" "Please stop," Lily moaned, pressing her hand to her ears. Sirius rolled his eyes at her but said, "Anyways, the point is, it's like this huge game to prove your school's the best." "Sounds like fun, honestly," Harry laughed. He couldn't help it with all the enthusiasm Sirius was showing, and his attitude had successfully pushed away any negative feelings Harry originally had. "Well, it was cancelled a long time ago," Remus added on with a smirk. "They seem to have problems controlling, certain aspects of it, and well, almost every year a contestant died," Lily finished bluntly. "You're a worrywart," James scoffed. "That was years ago, and you think the same thing about Quidditch." "Rogue bludger," she said bluntly, causing all four boys to sigh and Harry to try and defend. "But Darby, bucking broom, dementors, do I need to keep going?" She threatened, causing him to wince and admit defeat. "What are you being such a baby for?" James groaned at her. "Didn't Molly say something about an age limit? I think she'd have told her kids about this ages ago, so that she could tell them not to join if they were old enough." "Yeah, you probably have to be of age or something," Remus agreed. "Honestly, that makes sense anyways. You'd think they'd have thought of that in the first place." Lily at least looked mildly appeased, but his dad's offhand comment brought something back to almost the forefront of Harry's brain. Like his mother should stay worried about this. James didn't notice Harry's lingering worry, though, as he'd admit that this almost did make up for the no Quidditch this year. Harry was going to have a blast watching whatever the schools had cooked up. He quickly snatched the book back from Sirius now so he could keep going. "I cannot imagine Dumbledore joking about something like this," Remus laughed. "Why'd she interrupt?" James snickered. "That was a good one." "I've never heard it," Harry said in surprise. Even Lily couldn't find it in herself to groan this time as Sirius lit up like a kid with a new toy as he said, "All right, then listen good. A leprechaun, a troll, and a hag all went into a bar." Sirius put on a false voice as he cried out, "Benny," said the bartender to the leprechaun. "I warned you three not to come back here after the last time. Took me weeks to clean up after all the mischief you caused." He changed voices again to that of his best impression of an Irish man. "Oh, but it's Floss's birthday," said Benny, pointing to the hag, who smiled and showed off her one good tooth. "Give us a quick pint and let Troll and me sing to her. Then we'll be on our way. Cross me heart and hope tar die." Sirius then switched back to his normal, though slightly louder than was called for, voice as he continued. The bartender was a soft-hearted and rather soft-headed man, and so he did as Benny asked. No sooner had they finished their drinks when a fight broke out over who should be allowed to give Floss a birthday kiss. The troll and the leprechaun wrestled like they were caught in devil's snare and broke a remarkable amount of glassware. The bartender tried every spell he knew to stop them, but nothing worked. Truth to tell, he was not a very good wizard. Meanwhile, Floss the hag stood by, grinning and looking quite pleased with the celebration in her honor. After a lengthy brawl, the troll had the advantage. He towered over the quaking leprechaun, ready to smash an enormous beer barrel over the poor fellow's head. Then Sirius switched to his best feminine voice, his impression of Lily, though he'd never admit that aloud, and said, "Oh, for pity's sake," said Floss, who was also an accomplished witch. "Alohomora." Sirius continued the pattern of switching between each voice as he finished off the joke. With a wave her wand, Floss opened the sealed barrel, dumping a lovely golden brew over the troll and quite possibly saving the leprechaun's life. "Floss," cried the leprechaun, "let me thank you with a wee kiss." But the hag shook her tangled tresses of hair and refused him. "Yes, see, I'm the one she likes," shouted Troll. Somersaulted to his lady love and tried to gather her in his great arms, but in a blink of a cyclops eye, the hag disapparated and her companions fled. Once again, the bartender was left with a dreadful mess to clean up. His wife, who had witnessed the whole affair, heaved a sigh and began to mop up the ale. In this voice he actually tried at Madame Rosmutter, to which he would admit to if anyone had bothered to ask. "Well, my dear," she said, "at least we've learned two important lessons." "What's that?" said her grumpy husband. He was in no mood for philosophical musing. Obviously, the wise and alarmingly cheerful woman continued, a penny saved is a penny spurned, and a rolling troll gathers no floss. Harry let out a surprised burst of laughter. Even the others joined in, though they'd heard the joke before. Sirius just had this magical way about him of being able to retell any joke and still making it funny, the one and only exception being his serious joke, but he was still working on that. The only ones who wouldn't know about it are the Muggle-borns, Lily snorted, and even then you're likely to hear about it at least once before you leave school. The stories about this thing still get thrown around some nights. How many times has Hogwarts hosted it? Harry asked in surprise. Well, the first one was held sometime during the 12th or 13th century, Remus shrugged, but it officially ended in 1792. It was held every 5 years by each school in turn, James shrugged. So Merlin knows how many times exactly, Sirius snorted, not up for doing the math at the moment, but Harry seemed to get the gist of it and nodded. You see, Lily, you and Hermione worry too much, Remus nodded along. Lily just sighed, recognizing she was outvoted and it wasn't worth the argument. I'm sure that's what they said last time, Lily muttered to herself, her eye still lingering a moment too long on her son with worry, so she was the only one who noticed him flinch at that statement. She frowned, but didn't call him out on it as he quickly tried to smooth out his face and pretend otherwise. Euro, James couldn't help but mutter, considering nothing good had ever happened on that date. I'll agree with you on that one, Harry sighed, rubbing in high agitation at his temple now. He just knew the more he heard about this, the less he was liking it, no matter how persistent his 14-year-old mind was trying to butt in and say this sounded like a blast. Impartial judge? Harry asked with only the vaguest of interest now, though he tried to hide it for the sake of the men who still looked enthralled by the idea. Not happening, pup, Sirius said at once. This is going to be a surprise. Harry gave him a good-natured pout, but didn't argue the point, almost relieved to let it go and hoping Dumbledore would soon as well. Cannot blame him, James cackled, knowing he'd be first in line if this had happened while he'd been there. They may have already worked this out, but none of them could honestly bring themselves to groan about it too much. Harry had enough life and death situations the past 3 years to last them a lifetime. Despite how much of a riot it would be for them to hear about this going on, none of them could even pretend they weren't a little happy Harry wouldn't even get an opportunity. I can see why they'd be a little ticked, Remus winced in sympathy. They are turning 17 soon enough. It's so close they must feel personally affronted. Can't wait to see what they do about it, James said with an old mischievous smirk, which Sirius happily adopted moments later. Lily chuckled lightly at them, but wasn't going to hold out any real hope either of them got away with anything. Well, he's just being a right old killjoy, Sirius shook his head in mock scolding. Right, James drew the word out in disbelief, as if half the students in that school aren't going to try anyways. It'll be a hoot to hear, Remus snickered. You cannot announce something like that and actually expect them to chop anywhere, let alone bed, Lily said deadpan. Least we're in agreement on that, James chuckled. And if they'd bumped it down to 16, every 15-year-old close enough would be complaining, Remus rolled his eyes. There really is no happy median. Right, fun, Lily rolled her eyes, thinking the twins needed to hear some of the stories she had. Maybe they'd change that word. Can't deny the glory of that, Sirius nodded simply, like his best friend unable to bat away his own desire to see his name tossed into this. Allure to any, Remus laughed, not particularly wanting himself to go out and do this, but knowing he'd back either of his friends if they wanted their go. The others were fighting hard to keep a straight face as Harry eyed them all critically for a clue. It probably wasn't fair of them, but they wanted to see the surprise on his face when he came to realize that answer. Not a bad idea, actually, James nodded at once. Much more subtle than I would have given them credit for, Remus agreed. Sometimes the subtlest things make the biggest impacts, Sirius said with one too many crinkles around his eyes, giving Harry the strong impression he spoke from experience. Well, there's that, Harry said, still watching those around him and looking for a crack. Couldn't Dumbledore saying something to this judge get them out of it? Nuhu, James wagged his finger. You're not getting it out of us, you'll just have to wait. Harry grumbled at them, but had no way to argue the point. And here I used to agree with them, Remus sighed. his smile slipping slightly as he remembered one too many times of the risks of Harry's life. James and Sirius exchanged, put out looks, knowing they would have agreed with the twins before they started these books, but now wishing for nothing more exciting to happen to Harry this year than watching some older students do something stupid and maybe a paper cut from his homework. It's not always what you learned, Sirius shrugged. It's the ingenuity it takes to win the game. I'm glad you're not encouraging him or anything, Lily snorted. That woman is agitating me the more I hear about her. Lily's scowl deepened, hating to hear about Neville speaking of her the more this carried on. What woman would say that to a child? It's not his job. Agreed. I've heard Frank go on about her. Remus sighed with pity. He's about as lovely on the discussion as you are about Petunia. Lily pursed her lips so tight they went almost white, but all they could really do was feel pity for the poor boy. It was so sad that Neville's life hadn't seemed to turn out much better than Harry's, but sitting here griping about it wasn't going to fix anything. Sirius went an ugly grey colour, remembering his and someone's old gag of trying to push each other into these. It was a terrible blow to the gut at such a random reminder, and he'd already been in such a down mood at the thought of Neville's life. He looked pretty bad in that moment. The others hadn't really noticed, though, as they all avoided each other's eye in that moment, because they'd all thought on the exact same person, and James quickly read past the sticky moment. Ron's such a sweet friend, even to someone who's not a best friend, Lily said, with a little too much pitch, but it at least made the boys smile again. He's literally been with you the whole time, Remus snorted. When did this happen? Before they sat down to eat, Harry shrugged. Glory, in all the fuss I've nearly forgotten about her little problem, James snorted in surprise. Lily gave him a sharp look, mostly for referring to it as a little problem, but wasn't going to have a go at her husband for something she'd already had out with Sirius. Sirius let out a surprised bark of laughter, thinking that those two who were clearly best friends doing that to each other was pretty hilarious. I don't think I could stand listening to Ron go through that any more than Harry, Lily sighed, running her hand through her hair at the thought. Thankfully, the age rule applies to him too, Remus said peacefully. Sorry, pup, Sirius smirked. You could be 17 and still not pass for it. You're too scrawny. Oi, Harry yelped, giving him the stank eye, but the others were too busy laughing to think he meant it. So not only would you go for it, Remus chuckled, you have no doubts you win, eh? Every person in that school is having a similar dream at that moment, James laughed. And Harry's actually got some experience to back up the delusion he could, Sirius smirked. Delusion? Harry pouted, choosing to stay in this conversation and ignore the terrible ache he was getting from this daydream. It's not as if it had any meaning at all. Right. You sure sound confident Harry could win, Lily shot back at Sirius. Hey, I'm happy he can't. Sirius threw his hands up in surrender. I'm just saying, he's lived through some stuff that would give him an edge. You should stop talking now, James butted in with a snicker, knowing Sirius didn't mean it, but Lily was giving him the stank eye meaning she was thinking otherwise, causing all four of them to smile at Harry's expense, who rather wished his mum and Sirius would start going at it again to save him from this. As if Ron wasn't thinking the exact same thing, James snorted as he passed Sirius the book. Except possibly with some other girl than Cho, Sirius nodded in agreement. Too big reveals this chapter back to back. Hope I did them justice. At least that's MuggleNet's version of the joke. The whole of it was taken from there, and I claim no originality in that. My personal favorite punchline is something else, but I'm saving that for another book, so just consider this a warning. This joke may crop up again. Chapter 14. Mad-Eye Moody. Chapter text. Sirius couldn't wait to get his chapter going. He was surprised how much he missed reading this. I would expect nothing less of them, James smirked. I wonder who won all the previous tournaments. Remus' eyes sparked with interest, wishing he'd done more than just heard some passing stories about this. I know that Beauxbatons won 62 times, while Hogwarts 63, Harry prattled off, then gave a shrug and said, Don't tell me you're surprised Hermione knows random facts about this thing. That gave them all a laugh as they agreed. They don't change that in between years, Lily sighed. You're stuck with them until your 5th year ends at least. For some reason, this didn't seem to make Harry feel any better. Both Harry and Sirius felt a chill creep up their spine. Their last experience with that class hadn't ended well, including Remus began in amazement, but Sirius kept going loudly. Well, all right then, he chuckled as he leaned back. Especially since it doesn't even get you out of homework, James grumbled. Still wishing I had, Harry huffed. That prophecy had done him a lot more harm than good at the end. Sirius, though, caught on something else as he yelped. Hey, she's eating again. Couldn't really see her holding out that no food grudge forever, Remus snorted. Is it still too late to do that? Harry sighed. You'd have to take it up with McGonagall, Lily shrugged. Have a valid reason for switching, which I suppose harassment by a teacher repetitively telling you you're going to die counts. Hermione had so many extra classes last year she wouldn't have had to give one, James added on thoughtfully. Harry sighed, wishing he had done something about this, but still couldn't seem to shake that feeling that he may be grateful someday he kept up with Trelawney. Well, that too, Remus agreed, knowing she wouldn't admit to that. This time even Sirius couldn't keep up the bravado that everything was fine. Time had been hedging on so long, he really was starting to get a walk over your grave type of feeling the longer he went without answering. Still, he was thankful he was the one reading, as his managing to keep going was a reminder to the others he was just fine now. No offense to Hedwig, but I like that answer better than something having happened to Sirius, Remus murmured under his breath, to which Lily couldn't help but agree with. Gross, Sirius said extra loudly, catching everyone's eye with a hard glint telling them to drop it. No need to make a fuss until real evidence showed up. James cracked first, nodding along and saying, agreed, one of the worst herbology classes, those things should be classified as a punishment. Were great for a little surprise, though, Remus added on more heavily than he meant to, but at least he'd tried. Sirius still gave him a winning smile and ignored how they still kept watching him a little too closely. Lily snorted in surprise, flexing her hand in disgust at the thought, but upon contemplation she could see where Harry was coming from. Oh, but it has so many more uses, Sirius sighed with an old smile the others knew far too well. None that need to be shared right now, Lily said pointedly to a very curious Harry who loved hearing their old stories. James pouted at her, as he loved nothing more than sharing with his son all the mischief he'd gotten up to at school, but Sirius went back to his reading anyways. Ooh, Lily co-ed. Really would have been best if she'd tried asking for help with that first, Remus grimaced in agreement. Harry did a double take in surprise. He'd never seen her as far as he knew, but surely any acne couldn't have been that bad. Brilliant, James beamed. He's clearly moved on from those worms. Glad to hear it, Sirius nodded on with high curiosity, as we know he can do better. This should be fun, Remus chuckled, his mind already spinning on what could be in there. Harry's first instinct was to disagree, a feeling already rising in him saying he did not like whatever this was at once. I know one that doesn't give a rat's ass, Lily muttered. Harry watched them all expectantly, but was surprised to find no one here recognized the name. This only managed to increase his unease, but still he asked in normal tones, so no fun facts about this? I've no idea what they are, Remus shrugged, his brow wrinkling up showing his displeasure at that statement. Maybe something newly discovered, Sirius offered, sounding even more interested now. Well, that was fascinating, Lily got out, not really sure how else to put it. She certainly wasn't drawn to whatever those were, and they hardly sounded like anything she wanted to be around. Those really do sound interesting, Remus agreed without the sarcasm. For some odd reason, though, they sound like a cross between manticores and fire crabs. Oh, come on, Remus, Sirius chuckled. I'm sure it's just something newly discovered. Can you imagine those two things breeding? Remus agreed it was a laughable idea. Those had just been the first two things he'd thought of that they resembled, but it must be something else. Plus, I like to think Hagrid's done enough illegal stuff for a while, James muttered. That sounds fun, James said, trying his hardest for some enthusiasm, though he couldn't deny he would have enjoyed the thought more if any of them actually knew what those things were. That's encouraging, Lily snorted, unable to stop her mind spinning slightly why Hagrid would hesitate on this. Shouldn't he know that kind of answer before he started the class? She liked Hagrid, of course, but she really was beginning to wonder how well adept at teaching he was. In other words, he has no idea, Remus sighed. Please tell me I'm the only one getting a bad feeling about this, Sirius frowned. Someone tell me they're not thinking what I am. None of them could, though, as the longer this carried on, they were starting to wonder just how new this discovered species was. And it's still getting worse, Lily grumbled. I'll take the pus. At least I know what it is, Lily sighed. Least they can't bite Ron like that, Sirius happily offered. Guess they can still pinch, though. James gave a weak smile. The boys really couldn't suppress some surprised laughter at his expense. Anyone getting burned by a creature's but would be laughed at. Well, this is just wonderful, Lily sighed, running her hand through her hair while her eyes continued narrowing in suspicion. They're getting better by the second, Sirius agreed mildly. I'd love to give you one, James snarked. Let it loose in the Slytherin common room. I don't find that a valid point, Sirius shivered. I do, though it saddens me Hermione had to make Hagrid's point, Lily shrugged. We know she needs to get her word in. She probably just beat him to the punch, James offered. Again, all five of them muttered with unhappy remembrance. Dragons are fairly small when they first hatch, Remus sighed. That doesn't mean how big they'll grow. You are not helping, Lily scolded. Neither's Hermione, James snorted. Well, there's that, Sirius gave a laugh. Hush, Remus said in surprise. This coming from the girl who's jumping to every conclusion possible about houseelves. You'd think she'd give these little things a chance, James agreed. Guess she was really hungry. Sirius raised a brow in surprise. Harry was getting a feeling like he knew there was a reason in particular Hermione would be in such a hurry to eat, but didn't press it, and instead remained as confused as the rest of them. That would be more insulting than helpful, James scoffed. She must know that. Sirius pretended to retch over the side of the sofa at having so many vile vegetables in your mouth at once. Oh, I think she missed her real best friend, Remus snickered. Has that ever actually stopped her before? Lily snorted. I don't suppose since she was so insanely wrong last year about you dying she'll quit this year, Sirius asked, without any real hope. I wouldn't hold your breath, Harry sighed. Every student in that school could be considered preoccupied about something, Lily scoffed. That was so vague, it wouldn't matter what happened. She claimed credit for it. Remus rolled his eyes. Isn't this what the centaurs do? James asked with only vague curiosity, just trying to get her talking to stop for a moment. I think it's more elaborate, Sirius shrugged. He really only had the faintest idea like the rest of them. But yeah, something similar. All four of them couldn't help but laugh at that. None of them could blame him one bit, as they'd been hoping her little speech would be cut off soon as well. Harry had an unhappy little frown on his face again at the thought of that. He knew that she was in fact a real seer, and she made quite a few right predictions last year no matter her agitating personality. What if this was one of them? The thing he was most currently dreading happened to be something would happen to Sirius, but that couldn't be it, right? That caught them all up with Harry's line of thinking, and Sirius couldn't help but lose a few shades of color in shock. He had been the first to believe in this woman's real power, and he'd regretted it ever since, as she continued to somehow manage to make his life hell because of it. There was no way that she was right about this, though. He was fine. He had to be, for Harry's sake as well as his own. He knew he'd never forgive himself if something did happen to him, and he'd be virtually leaving Harry on his own again. Until he had concrete proof from this stupid little text that something had happened to him, he smothered that terrible fear and put on a confident smile for the others, feeding the line. Ah, the old quack is just winding you up, pup. You know she'd love nothing more than to see she'd gotten under your skin. Harry gave him a brave smile, but none of that even began to erase their worry, which would linger until the moment Sirius' name was cleared. Lily longed for the days where she'd believed that. Yeah, that was about where all of their suspicions were coming from as well. He had much more important things to be thinking about, Sirius said, with as much pompousness as he could put into his tone. You think you're more important than Merlin himself, Lily said half-heartedly, with none of her usual ire. Sirius gave her a winning smile which she couldn't help but roll her eyes at. That's genetics, you beanbag, James snorted. I fault that to nutrition, Lily scathed under her breath, knowing that while James had been scrawny in his youth, he would have shot up by this age point, while Harry still seemed to be lacking due to his home life. Which is always a loving reminder, Sirius got out through gritted teeth. All five of them began laughing without remorse at that. Considering all the right predictions she'd made, it was nice to see her be so utterly wrong about this when none of them could still take a lingering eye off of Sirius. He's more restraint than we do, James got out, still laughing so hard at least they were sure that's what he'd said. Probably means you're going to visit the ocean or something, Remus snorted. Sirius was starting to list against the arm of the couch. He was laughing so hard, still blinking as fast as he could to try and keep himself going even while doing so. At least Lily tried to suppress her humor at that one, juvenile as it was. But the joke had been so unexpected, she wasn't doing too well. Nah, I'll bet she'd have done that even if you did fawn over her. Remus rolled his eyes. She seems as strict as McGonagall, without the intentional fun side. James nodded in agreement. There's James' proof to back it up, Sirius said without remorse. He'd been longing since the first book just to hear about something as mundane as Harry getting extra homework, so despite his pup's put-out look, he was going to yuck this up as long as possible. Wishing more and more I'd taken arithmancy, Harry grumbled. Just keep walking, Lily said hopefully. And miss the opportunity to hear what he's got to say, James demanded, pretending to look faint at the idea. Whatever would he do with himself then? Well, this can't be good, Remus frowned. Hasn't always been bad, Sirius countered back with a small twist of his own lips. Now they're just being insulting, James sneered at the misuse of Arthur's name. It should hardly be considered credible if they can't even keep their own simple fact like a name straight, Lily nodded. Wish you were, Harry seethed, tensing up more every line Sirius read. He was asked to come onto that scene. Lily spat in outrage. Who the bloody hell is this woman to be saying all of this horrid stuff? What's she have against Arthur? It's not just him, Remus reminded with an ugly look in place. She's had a go at Bill, remember? They said the whole of the curse breakers, but the fact that he was specifically mentioned pops. So what you have against the Weasleys? Sirius sighed. Nothing as far as I know, Harry grumbled. At least Ron's never said anything, so maybe even he doesn't know. Maybe Arthur turned her down in school or something, and she's getting revenge, James offered with an almost amused smirk. If she's that petty, then she's being sad, and you're depressing me. Lily rolled her eyes, flicking her fingers at Sirius to convince him to keep going. Sirius did not look remotely pleased to have said such a horrid thing, but hoped dearly Harry and Ron would get him back enough that he didn't stop amongst the protest around him. Harry's face flushed bright red in hatred, despising anyone speaking about Mrs. Weasley like that. You're killing me, Harry, James groaned. He wanted to see that brat cursed already. Couldn't say, nobody would notice, but an effing little shit like you, Remus growled. I really wish you would stop doing that, Sirius snarled. Harry had to take a deep breath to answer without shouting. We were in front of the Great Hall, teachers everywhere. I didn't want to see him end up in detention without even getting proper revenge. Sometimes it's worth it, Remus huffed. Brilliant, dear. Lily made sure he heard her praise amongst the gale of laughter. Harry didn't look as pleased as he normally would have at his mother's words. He was still too wrung up about why he'd had to throw that insult. Can't take what you dish out, James sneered. Typical of his kind, Sirius nodded. He tried to curse you when you were turning around, Lily snarled. Can't say I'm surprised after all the dirty things he's done, Sirius grimaced with disgust, thankful that he'd missed, and now Harry would have a chance to retaliate. James went wide-eyed in surprise, wondering who else had stepped in. Sirius wasn't sure he'd read that right. He sat there gaping down at the book for several long moments before his eyes convinced his brain he'd really just read the most wondrous fact he could. Then the others caught on, and all 5 of them were leaning back into their seating. They were laughing so hard. Only after several minutes did it vaguely subside, and Remus gasped out. Well, no one could say he didn't have that coming. A ferret, James wheezed. Of all the, oh, that's so perfect, I couldn't have done better. Lily collected herself next, smoothing out her hair from her face, but still unable to shake the smile this caused. Malfoy was an arrogant little thing who'd thrown the first punch at Harry's back. No way could she find anything to protest in his getting this treatment. Sirius got his breath back last, his eyes still watery from laughing so hard, and not sounding like he cared one jot. Cool, Sirius chirped. The more he heard about that thing, the more it sounded like a pretty good compensation for losing an eye. He can see out of the back of his own head with that, Lily asked with mild disgust. Can see how that can come in handy, though. Remus' grin widened as all the possibilities of this came to mind. James got a smile in place of agreement before anyone noticed otherwise, but the second Sirius turned back, it slipped away again to be replaced with confusion and concern. He just couldn't picture this in his head, no matter how fascinating the idea. Oh, I hope you follow, Sirius begged Harry. I would pay my weight to see that thing going to Snape, and him trying to figure out what it is. Harry gave another light laugh, but somehow got the feeling that wasn't what had happened, causing the boys another round of ungraceful laughter, while Lily's brows shot up in surprise. She wasn't going to say anything about transfiguring him like that, though he was a teacher, she reflected, and wished he'd show better. But the physical violence was pushing what was called for in this situation. "Oh, come on, Lily Flower," James wheedled when he caught sight of her expression. "You know Malfoy deserves this." "I'm not arguing that." Lily shook her head with a small frown still in place, but he could really hurt him doing that. "You worry too much," Sirius scoffed. "You must know Moody won't cause him a permanent injury, just show him a bit of what a waste of space he is." Lily still couldn't wipe away her concern, but Sirius moved on like she'd agreed with him anyways. "I wonder if that might be how he got one of his injuries," Remus considered. "Wouldn't surprise me," Sirius shrugged. "Though he has always been against cowardice like that move," James pointed out. Lily sighed as she ran her hand up and down her face. Did Sirius have to sound so indulgent as he said all of that? "I sincerely hope this did teach him a lesson." Remus nodded in agreement, only managing to increase Lily's consternation when Harry nodded as if in agreement. "Why is she always carrying so many books around?" Harry asked out of the blue. "She can't have that much time to read." "She does some other stuff besides teach," Lily happily explained, more than pleased at this change of topic, while the boys looked mildly annoyed they'd been distracted from this perfect moment, and now McGonagall was likely going to ruin it altogether. "I know she submits essays and some opinion pieces to the Ministry on a few of the problems the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes Division has. I'm sure most of those are for research, though like Hermione, I wouldn't be too surprised if she did have just a fun reading novel mixed in there." "You two get to talking about the weirdest things," James snickered when Harry looked like he was fixing to return with something. Lily gave him a sharp glare. He was one to talk, but Sirius kept reading loudly to get back on track. "Doesn't even," which was all Remus could get out before he started laughing again, though forcing himself to be quite enough serious would keep going. "Isn't it obvious?" James raised a brow at her, thinking she usually caught on faster than that. "He's just helping out a fellow student." Sirius quickly nodded in agreement, as if McGonagall were standing in front of them now. "Well, he's not wrong," Harry smirked, cracking up all of the boys again, who started snickering like idiots in Lily's opinion. She was watching them indulgently now, though, unable to stop her own spark of amusement now that she knew this wasn't going to progress further. At least McGonagall had always been quick on the uptake. "Not even going to try," James got out, for he was holding his sides in laughter again. "Her reaction's my favorite part," Harry got out, starting to gasp a bit he'd been laughing so hard. "Oh, she's such a killjoy," Sirius pouted down at the pages. Even though he was trying for a sad tone at their fun being gone, it still wasn't getting rid of his amusement. One jot Lily gave a sad sigh, wishing McGonagall had checked to see if Malfoy had an injury or anything. "Oh, yes, just a little side knot. Right along with don't slip Veritaserum into their morning breakfast," Lily snorted. "Wish you could get away with stuff like that," James said. "It would have made Mooney's time there a lot more interesting." Remus didn't even bother to look abashed. "Well, he definitely got that," Sirius crowed with triumph. "Not effective and a nuisance," Lily rolled her eyes. "Taking house points away seems to work best," Harry offered. "For those who cared," James snorted. "I swear you could make a recording of him doing that, make him disappear, and no one would know the difference," Sirius snickered. "I'm hoping Moody wasn't the one investigating him on the charges of being a Death Eater," Remus sighed. "Otherwise, I'd be really disappointed he couldn't find anything. And we know Moody can't be bribed out of whatever he would have found." Sirius nodded in agreement. "So I'm with you. Hopefully he just tried at his trial or something and couldn't get through." Lily sadly remembered a time where she would have felt upset at the way this news was delivered, making it perfectly obvious to anyone in the know that he was referring to Snape as a Death Eater as well in that instance. But that ship had sailed long ago. "I can't believe McGonagall let them go," Harry chuckled. "He may just drag Malfoy out of sight and transfigure him into a slug next." "We can only hope," Sirius nodded in agreement. "He's probably still trying to find where he left his breath at," James snickered. "I know I am." I want to get that on a t-shirt, Sirius groaned, unable to believe he could still keep laughing as his head would likely fall off soon, but his body was trying. That's the best moment of his life, Lily snorted. Poor boy's got a long way to go then. I don't know what you're talking about, Sirius scoffed at her. I'd make the best patroness in the world with that memory. What on earth is she up to? Remus demanded, mildly disappointed they had finally seemed to step off the topic of the ferret. Something to do with ourselves, I'd presume, Lily said with much more curiosity. She knew she'd like to hear about this. Here's hoping Harry doesn't go and check, Sirius sighed. I get a feeling Harry had a better lesson from him than you, James beamed. Or it's okay, Moony, he didn't really mean it, Sirius told Remus with an amused smirk. Remus rolled his eyes at the teasing. He hadn't taken that personally. Those three sound like you three, Lily smiled. Honestly, he's not the only Auror in the world, but he is one of the best, James countered at once. He comes from a whole family of Aurors, Sirius added on, so he's known what he's doing since he was in diapers. And he clearly gets results, Remus shrugged. I wouldn't bet against him in a fight. Lily started snickering when she realized they'd just proved her point, but wasn't going to pursue it. I feel like that's the first time Ron's ever said anything about a class like that. Harry laughed as Sirius handed the book to him. Chapter 15. The Unforgivable Curses. Chapter text. Harry began his reading with high spirits, as eager as Ron to get to Moody's first lesson, no matter how much his inner mind was sending off pinging noises every time his name was mentioned. In his first week, I consider that impressive, James smirked. Can't say I'm surprised, Lily muttered bitterly. Ew, Remus shuddered. That shouldn't be an allowed punishment, Sirius scowled hotly, and Neville owns a toad, so that's just extra cruel. Actually, Sirius, the horned toad is a species of lizard, not of the amphibian kind, Lily corrected. Sirius looked stumped for a moment, muttering about insane people naming things before he shook himself and got back on track. It's still disgusting. No one's arguing with you there, James agreed. I didn't know better, Harry defended when Lily looked like she was fixing to repeat herself. Just went by the name. Let's just see him try anything against him, Remus snorted. Moody'll turn him into a bat for us. Can't wait, Sirius said eagerly. Probably longer, as we don't know when he started, Lily corrected, while the boys rolled their eyes at such a minor thing. James gave a maniacal laugh, as they all knew what that meant. A dream come true, Sirius agreed solemnly. Lily couldn't help a little snort of laughter. She could just imagine McGonagall or someone coming by and seeing that and getting exasperated at this display. I'm sure that's a first, Remus chuckled. Seats, James asked. I guess this is a form of show for them, Sirius shrugged in agreement. He was sure they'd have been the same way at Harry's age. Can't sneak up on anyone anymore, can he? Remus said in surprise. It's not like you couldn't put a muffling charm on that if you need to, Sirius shrugged. He just doesn't while in school. Still, he's got to be a lot slower with that thing, James sighed for the guy. Always the best way to start the lesson, Lily smiled. Because that's not creepy at all, James couldn't help a shiver. Bet a letter from Professor Lupin was all kinds of interesting, Sirius snickered. Did it start with, warning Harry Potter will give you hell, because everything in the school tries to kill him, so you need to teach him every deadly spell you can, Harry grumbled. I doubt I would have phrased it like that, Remus said gently, while the others looked like they wanted to laugh, or would have if that hadn't been so true. Sad that Remus is the only teacher who's actually given any value to this class, Lily sighed. The last one was involuntary, but sure that's about right, Remus grumbled. Well, he's not wrong, James shrugged. I'm blasted you know any useful offensive spells, Sirius agreed. I can do my own studying, Harry defended. I've looked up some stuff for other classes and just ran across others. We're not blaming you, dear, Lily quickly corrected. We're just sad is all. This is a really important class, and the fact that you're so lacking isn't going to help you later. You're showing an immense display of skill, knowing what you do even with the problems with this class, Remus agreed. Harry blushed slightly at the praise, since as far as he was aware, everyone was at the same level as him, except Hermione, of course. But the compliments were so unexpected, he couldn't find it in himself to argue. He's not staying longer, Sirius pouted. Guess Dumbledore can only find a temporary fix now, Remus sighed. Maybe we'll get lucky, and he'll find a reason to stay, Lily said hopefully, as having a head aura hanging around would certainly make her feel better with all the problems Harry got up to. Harry couldn't help but wonder why his gut reaction was to correct her, say he wanted nothing of the sort to happen. But then there was again this conflicting feeling inside like he'd enjoy this very much, as he knew Moody to be a good person. He'd never felt such opposite opinions about one man, and to have no idea where they could stem from was starting to drive him crazy. Sirius couldn't help a little chuckle. "Least someone acknowledges it," Lily grumbled, still smarting about that article. All of them gave a laugh at that. Clearly his retirement was more entertaining than he was leading on if he set dustbins on people or cats. At the reminder, they were almost hoping to hear Moody's side of the story to that now. Lily was getting uneasy at the way this was starting. "Well, as long as Dumbledore thinks so," James said, with much more sarcasm than he ever would have thought possible. But after everything had come out about Sirius last year, James really couldn't say he was in the headmaster's corner 100% anymore. "Merlin, help it, they're 14. I don't want to see them having to defend themselves against anything," Lily sighed, more upset than she could put into words that even in this Voldemort-free world, she still couldn't bring herself to argue this too much. Oh, she'd complain about it. She didn't want her son to have to learn to defend himself, but she couldn't find it in herself either to say that he shouldn't know this either. Better safe than sorry. "Not wrong about that," Remus nodded. James did a double take, not sure if he'd heard that last part right. Sirius let out a surprised whistle, saying, "This thing keeps getting cooler. It can see through desks now. Wonder what else it can see through." "Oh, so we're starting at the tippy top," Lily raised a brow. "It's not a bad idea," James shrugged. "Start with the hardest and work your way down. By the time you get to the bottom, you'll breeze through them." "The opposite usually works better," Remus countered. "Starting with the basics means you'll have a better handle the farther up you go." "Both can work for different people," Sirius waved them off. "You really want to sit around and debate the school system, because I don't." He turned pleading eyes on Harry, who was more than happy to keep going. Harry noticed his dad go a few shades paler in shock at the mention of that curse, so said, "So that's where I learned this," aloud, remembering he'd gone over this with his family back during his second year. James gave him an absent smile as he quickly came back from wherever his mind had been. Lily was still chewing over the cut-off argument the boys had been having, wanting to argue that they were still a spot too young to be learning this. It was seventh-year material, but also couldn't push that it was wrong for them to know this either. So long as he didn't teach them the actual incantation, there was no harm in making them aware of these. "Living that time," Lily scoffed aloud, "and trouble doesn't quite cover it. People who do have it used on them usually are so torn up about what they did, they don't want to come forward," James explained for Harry. "While those who probably did it of their own free will have no problems coming forward and pretending they were forced to," Sirius grumbled. The four of them shivered as they realized what was coming. Moody was going to demonstrate these spells on those arachnids. Lily's feelings of unease began rising another few degrees. Now this was definitely pushing the limit. "And there's that," Remus nodded, thinking this was as close as he'd been to one since his time in the forest, and it probably wasn't a pleasant reminder for him. "He couldn't have at least done that silently," Lily sighed. The boys really weren't going to argue the point. They all exchanged wary looks, rather as upset as Lily for once on this matter. It wasn't just Harry, but he was the one they were thinking of when the thought of preserving what little innocence he had. He'd already been through so much, and hearing about him learning these spells was just that little extra saddening to them. None of them were still going to say this much out loud. They didn't want Harry to think they thought he couldn't handle it. "I didn't even know spiders could do that," Harry said in surprise, unable to imagine the little black body contorting like that. "If the body's physically capable of the ability, even slightly though it won't do it voluntarily, the Imperius can have you do it," Remus sighed. Lily shook her head sadly, thinking this was a good reason right there why these kids shouldn't be shown this spell quite yet. They clearly weren't old enough to realize how horrible this was, even to something like a little spider. "Least he's keeping them on track," Sirius muttered. James gave an involuntary gag at the mention. "So there's no way to tell the difference." Harry sighed. "No looking at a memory through a pensieve or anything." "Sadly not," Lily explained. "You can erase the memory of that person being imperiused, and then you just witness what did happen. It's not concrete. Veritaserum wouldn't work either, Sirius sadly tacked on. He hated talking about this. It was bringing back bad memories of how he kept picturing his own trial had gone getting him sent into Azkaban, but Harry deserved to know this no matter his discomfort. Since you just admit to the things you did, and if the spell was done up right, you probably wouldn't even know you'd been doing it under the curse. Harry sighed, thinking that while magic had its advantages, there were clearly so many faults in the system it was sad how easily it could be manipulated for all the cruel people of the world. He'll be doing what now? Lily snapped sharply. Chill, Lil. James waved her off. I'm sure he's just going to explain the concept. Even Dumbledore couldn't allow him to actually use that spell on these kids. Harry got double vision for a moment, his tongue locking up before he settled back and grumbled about his stupid memory messing with him. Harry had shouted that so loudly that he made the others jump, lighting a smile on his face for spooking them like that and managing to distract them, mostly Sirius, from wherever their thoughts had been lingering. I don't want to know how he and his gran got into that conversation, Lily shivered. Harry was getting a foreboding feeling, like he'd be much happier if Neville had no idea about some unforgivable spell in particular. Poor kid, Remus smiled lightly, wishing that Neville had more confidence in himself more often. He'd clearly done well in this class given the right encouragement. Hopefully Moody would help that along more. There it was. Harry felt a distinct blow to his gut. Hearing Neville talk about this put him on edge in a terrible way. He tried to shake it off when the others noticed, but it wasn't working that well. Something was lingering, something he knew deep down would be terrible to learn. Why did he ask? Lily couldn't stop herself from asking, her voice cracking with unease. No one answered her. A thought flickered across their mind at the implication both Moody and Harry had given, but none of them could press it without finding something they didn't want. Guess Ron regrets his front row seat now, Sirius muttered. The four of them felt a terrible shiver. They'd all felt the brunt of that curse. It tended to be a favorite of Death Eaters trying to incapacitate someone long enough to run, and the reminder on something even as small as a spider wasn't a pleasant one. Harry felt lucky, if sad for thinking so, that he only had to witness this happening to a spider, hoping dearly right now this was all he'd have to deal with in regards to that spell. Lily couldn't help but sigh with relief. She had no shame in admitting that was starting to disturb her, and wasn't surprised it would get to several kids in that class. Oh dear, Remus muttered, leaning into the couch in fear as this wasn't helping them lessen their worry of why Neville would be reacting so badly to this. Ooh, Lily muttered, wanting to go over there and give the boy a hug. She wasn't sure if they were guessing insanely wrong, and she hoped she was, and he had some kind of personal experience with this curse, or if he in particular was having a bad reaction, but either way this was a moment where a boy should be reassured it was okay to be freaking out. Here's to dying out spells, James shivered. I already know, and I don't want to see it, Harry sighed. Why does she know this? James balked, realizing this for the first time. Just what the bloody hell kind of book is she reading to have come across this? You'd think this would be restricted section material. Merlin only knows, Sirius sighed. We can hardly claim we were saints in getting to know some information. Hermione's just doing the same thing, but not exactly putting it to the same uses. I don't like it when he smiles anymore, Lily grumbled. Lily couldn't help it. She wasn't a fan of spiders by any means, but she could feel her face tightening in displeasure for what she knew was coming. I personally wouldn't have demonstrated that spell on a spider in front of Ron. Sirius tried in vain to shoot some humor around again. This depressing mood was driving him crazy. Now that's going to be Ron's solution to every spider he sees. Hopefully Hermione will convince him his boot will work just fine, James added on out of obligation, still too on edge to really have his fun. Harry watched the faces around him drain of all color. They had certainly guessed this. Evidence had been piling up since Harry's remembered Dementor memory, coupled with his knowledge that if he struggled to remember on his own, he'd find a flash of green light, and that was it. It was just put like that. It seemed unreal. How had Harry survived that? How had Lily actually found a way to protect him from it? She died to save his life. Dumbledore had made that clear, but how on earth was this possible? Lily couldn't have been the first mother to step in the way of her child's death, so why wouldn't any of those instances counted in saving another child's life? If they were understanding this right, then Harry's situation shouldn't have been as unique as it was. Yet Moody himself had just confirmed as much, which meant that something more was going on. Something had to have happened other than just Lily staying in that line of fire without moving. Harry sat there in a state of unease as he tried to understand why Moody would even know that. How would anyone know these details? He'd only worked them out because of his Dementor experience, but then he presumed that the rest of the populace must have just pieced it together from the scene they'd walked in on. After all, the Avada Kedavra curse seemed a preference of Voldemort, and they would have seen the effects of it being used on James and Lily. Then they most likely would have seen the body of Voldemort, but Harry still sitting in his crib, and rightly assumed it had rebounded from the child, hence his fame. Lily was starting to get goosebumps all up her body as she tried to piece together what else could have happened that night if somehow James had also been involved. But the longer she thought about it, the harder it was getting to breathe. No one wanted to think about their final moments, even if they had been the reason her son had lived. James wasn't any better, his throat tightening like he was being forced to hear about Lily's final moments all over again. The thought of his only son being abandoned in that crib for Merlin knew how long before Hagrid found him with only the corpse of his mother for company. He couldn't get his brain past that appalling image to think on anything else. Remus and Sirius exchanged an unspeakable look, knowing that it would break them apart inside to do so. But they were the best ones who could actually sit around and talk about this. They wouldn't dream of keeping the others around for it. But someone had to figure out what the bloody hell had happened to make this possible. It could save their lives if they could find a way to activate this earlier somehow. They couldn't do anything now, though. It would be disastrous if they tried to convince them to cut the chapter off for now, because all three would protest they could handle it and try to join in. They were that kind of stubborn. So the two of them silently agreed they'd wait until later, and for now they did what they did best, caused a distraction. Remus snuggled up next to Lily, platonically wrapping his arm around her and giving the baby in her lap a playful tickle and saying, "Well, this sucks." Sirius gave an extra loud snort, telling him, "You have a way of understating things. You're not wrong, though, so how about we get to the end of the lesson? I want to gripe at Moody for giving you homework." James was still shaking his head slowly from side to side, clearly vacant to everything around him, so Harry wriggled up to his side, only hesitated for a second before throwing an arm around him and promising, "I get it. Do you want to stop? Or no?" James muttered. "Just keep going." Harry exchanged a look with Sirius, but couldn't find a reason to argue either. "Okay," I lied. "I want him to stop now." James tried to rasp that out. His mind certainly screamed it loud enough in his head, but the words closed off, and Harry kept going almost feverishly, clearly struggling to get this out loud. It was one of those terrible moments where Harry was actually pretty bitter at this book for publicizing all of his personal thoughts like this, something he never would have shared with those around him. "Yeah, that about covers it," Sirius whimpered, desperately latching onto the first memory he could to stop himself from crying, thinking of his brother that way. And instead he saw a white ferret bouncing around, and it cultivated into a strange look on his face that the others chose to ignore. The three marauders still gave an involuntary flinch every time that was mentioned, because they had just loved hearing about all of that the first time through. Not one of them could say a word to Harry, though. What could they say? Snap at him for dwelling on all of this. They'd probably be more concerned for his well-being if he pretended he never did. These were his private thoughts, terrible as they were, and they just wanted this part to be over, so none of them dared speak a word. Harry Speed read through all of that, detesting how it made each of them look likely to faint any moment, hating himself for dwelling on it when it only caused them pain. If there was anything he ever wanted to skip in these books, it's whenever mention of this came up. "Thank Merlin for that," was the first thing Lily coherently thought, twisting a strand of hair around her finger in agitation. The comfort of Remus at her side, and her baby on her lap, all that was holding her together. It was taking everything in her not to go over and curl into James' chest here and now, but she refused to show just how upset this was making her. She had to be stronger than that. "Be fun to try," Sirius said viciously, irrationally blaming Moody for having brought all of this up again. "Could have fooled me," Remus growled so low no one was sure of the exact words. Harry couldn't stop himself from shouting that again, though this time not a smile was seen. Harry had let that loose with primal emotion, the need to shout his frustration at his family's soon-to-come situation coming out in those two words. He regretted it when he saw how hard they all jumped. It clearly hadn't done anything to help, but when a rebuke didn't come, he kept going, realizing they all understood why he had. That's not the only way. Sirius couldn't help but hiss, forcing himself to only say that in his head. No need to bring up something he preferred to avoid. I don't want to be an aura anymore. James hadn't even realized he'd thought that for a moment, but then he considered it and realized how deeply he meant it. He pictured himself being the hero, hauling in all those terrible Death Eaters who dared harm muggles and muggleborns like his wife. It wasn't until Moody had showed off all of this, though, did the full impact of that job really sink in, how much it would cost him if he did pursue this. Sure, he knew about a lot of this stuff from his own time in his Dada classes, but none of his teachers had ever managed to make it seem so realistic. He tried to brush all of that away for now, though, knowing better than to try and make a life decision in the heat of the moment. This probably went without saying, but I'm saying it anyways, Sirius grumbled. I still prefer Mooney. He would have gotten through those kids' thick heads. This isn't a stupid game. Thanks, Remus said sincerely. I think this just proves they were too young for that lesson, James sighed. I still don't think we can claim any better if we'd been shown that our fourth year instead of seventh. Even Mooney might not have gotten that through to them. Thanks, Remus repeated with a touch of sarcasm this time. Oh, the poor dear, Lily sighed, wrapping her arm even tighter around her own infant. Neville had seemed like a really sweet and sensitive boy to her so far. She hated to think what this had done to him. He definitely knows someone that's been through that. James gave a blistering sigh at finally having said what they were all thinking. Or it was used on him, Sirius said lowly. Sirius? Lily shirked. He's 14. What the bloody hell? You can't pretend it's never happened. Sirius cut her off with steel grey eyes. Harry was watching all of them with a deep sense of fear now. He wanted desperately for them to stop talking about this. He didn't want to keep hearing about it, because the more they did, the more sure he was they were on the right track. Thankfully, he was the one with the book in his hands, so he kept going loudly. Don't think I could eat a bite, actually, Remus sighed. He wasn't actually speaking to you, you twat. James made his first attempt at a smile this chapter at teasing his friend. Oh, he's clearly peachy, and you, Sirius huffed. Lily pursed up her lips so tight they went white. She'd already felt horrible enough today because of the confirmation of her death, which felt imminent at this point. To see the affect it had on her family was terrible to watch, but to see it even being put on another innocent boy somehow still managed to make it worse. Oh, Lily cooed, her eyes finally shining with light other than threatening tears. He actually recognized what he did bothered him, and he's trying to help. Moody's an old softy, especially on those he deems worthy. James gave a slight smile. Harry didn't hear a word of this, because he was fighting back the urge to start swearing colorfully. Something about the idea of Moody trying to comfort Neville, of even being in the same room with him, set him so terribly on edge. He tried to lightly dig into this feeling, wondering if Neville was in danger and he should be worried, but all Harry felt was a sense of wronged. Had Moody done something to Neville? Bright spots were beginning to flash across his eyes from the pain of even doing this, and by the time he phased back into the conversation, he realized they were all watching him with real concern. Harry, are you okay? Sirius got out first with something like genuine fright on his face. You looked really ticked off there for a second. Does Moody take away your broom or something? Harry shook his head sadly, sighing deeply before saying, Can't say, just know that bothered me for some reason. I'm sure it's nothing. I think I'm just worried Moody makes things worse or something. That could be it, Remus agreed fairly. He's not exactly the cuddly grandpa type. At least he's trying, Lily defended. Harry gave them the best smile he could muster, couldn't quite hold it long enough to be believable, but still he pressed on reading before anyone could keep going. Maybe if he was Hermione that would have helped, Remus tried for a laugh, which fell flat when he noticed Harry's unease at Moody giving Neville a book somehow seemed significant to him. What on earth could that be about? I can't even honestly say I want to know any more, Lily shivered, too many horrible thoughts fleeing across her mind. That's right, Ron. Focus on the spider, Sirius said in a too high-pitched voice. Missed, but never forgotten, Remus said, meeting James' eyes fleetingly, but continuing as if in a joke with a rather forced smile he'd never admit to. I'm starting to get the feeling that's just going to be the pattern for most of the year until she finds whatever's bothering her. The ministry doesn't interfere in Hogwarts, Lily shrugged. It's at the headmaster's discretion what his students learn. Dumbledore clearly thinks you can take it. Well, don't get too excited, James muttered. It'll ruin all the fun of the work. Oh, good, Lily chirped, more than happy to be thinking on anything else now, even if Neville wasn't exactly a happy topic. You didn't mention him at dinner, and I was a little worried. They all let out pitiful sighs, wanting to know what had struck him so bad, terrified of getting the answer. And Neville's best subject is herbology. Remus smiled warmly. So Moody really did go out and help him, Lily crooned happily. Harry put up a strained smile in agreement. He knew this was a very good thing that had clearly made Neville feel better, so what about the mention of this book was sending off alarm bells for him? Which should be there more often, James said fairly. Everyone's got their strengths. He's been getting more confidence every year, Sirius nodded happily. Remus flushed bright red at the praise, but no one denied that they'd actually been thinking the same thing about him. You're putting way too much strain into a class that you both hate and is irrelevant to your life, Sirius snorted. Don't be like that, Lily scolded. I don't like the class much either, but you don't want him getting a T in the class just to spite the teacher. That's like cursing your own nose to spite your face. I doubt he's getting a career to do with divination, James sided with Sirius, and everyone's got one flunk class. No need to deter him from more important things. It's not as if he's got any other homework to be doing, Remus sighed, so it's good he's keeping his priorities up and doing that first. Why did we keep you around again? Sirius snorted, now trying to get Harry to move on, causing all three marauders to laugh at that. Lily gave Remus the stank eye in particular, saying, You just agreed with me he should be doing this. Why are you laughing that he's not even going to be doing it properly? I agreed it shouldn't be ignored, Remus admitted with a smirk. I never said to what degree. It's a class where for his final exam last semester he made up something. I think you can get away with the homework in the same style. Now I remember why we kept you around, James cackled. It's sad how true that probably is, Lily finally acquitted. Harry's obviously pretty good at this, Sirius snickered along, knowing it would be pointless to offer a few suggestions, but wanting to anyways. Harry was starting to get an odd sensation at Ron saying that. Had Ron just made a real prediction in the form of a joke again, it wouldn't be the first time, though he really disliked this one. At least they're having fun doing their work, James beamed. Can't say that about too much homework. Lily couldn't help a light giggle at that. Even Hermione couldn't get at you for this one, Remus pouted. She hates Trelawney as much as you. Wouldn't stop her from lecturing us on the proper procedures of homework. Harry smiled indulgently at the thought of his friend. Still love that cat, Sirius inserted with high amusement. Weasley's wizard wheezes again, James asked hopefully. Their mum can't tell them off for it now, Sirius agreed happily. Harry, though, wasn't so sure. He didn't know why, since his initial reaction had been that Fred and George would keep at their joke-sharp dream, so this would be a perfect opportunity for them. What else could it be about? Best place to be, James sighed, trying to look back fondly at some old memories that hadn't been tainted yet. He and Sirius were the sort of spokespersons for the Marauders, always the center of every crowd, whereas Remus and... Well, he kept off to the side and preferred to stay out of the limelight, which was better for him. Maybe, maybe not, Sirius shrugged. It depends on how much they trust him as a business partner or just an idea generator or what. Maybe he's out doing something else at the time, Remus agreed, and they'll show him later. Good ideas don't come at your own timing, James nodded sagely. Now that I'll believe, Lily grumbled. Harry, though, still didn't look satisfied with any of these answers. Something wasn't clicking right. James said with a lot of unease that time. Accusing who of what? Remus frowned. If we knew, you wouldn't have just asked, Sirius snarked at him. Remus stuck his tongue out at him, but no one really could come up with an answer for what that could mean. Well, that's not encouraging, Lily muttered as her face puckered up in thought. Accusing, James repeated with a ruffled brow. You think they caught someone doing something illegal? Can't be anyone at the school, Sirius muttered, running his hand through his hair. Can't imagine why they'd write out a letter for that. They'd just confront the person. We haven't really seen the twins doing anything that none of the other Weasleys have, though, Remus grumbled. So when could they have come across this? You think this is the same thing they were doing over the summer? Lily offered, which means it had to have happened around the time of the cup. The only difference there was the bet they set up with Bagman, Sirius shrugged, and he paid them back. Maybe they're looking into whoever mugged Bagman, James said, clapping his hands together as he thought he got it. We thought something like that had happened when Harry saw him in the forest, remember? What if the twins figured it out, and they're trying to get him to turn himself in? Harry was starting to fidget a bit, getting the feeling they were definitely on the right track. But there was some glaring oversight that one of them had said that made the whole thing fall through. He couldn't imagine what, though. He had seen Bagman pay the twins back, and Bagman had looked pretty tossed around, so surely his dad was right. They were out of ideas for now, though, so Harry kept going. I swear that's second nature to her by now, Harry chuckled lightly, happy to move on to a subject that wasn't depressing or didn't give him a headache, which is what the majority of this chapter had been doing to him, giving them all a light moment of laughter again. Guess it can happen to the best of us, Sirius happily shrugged, while Harry felt yet another twang inside him, something about Ran in the water. Now that's out there, Remus said mildly, as you avoid the forest. But he was forewarned, James said back with wide, insistent eyes, unable to wipe the smirk off his face. So now he would know not to go in there. You're all impassable, Lily chuckled. So, all five of them muttered as they doubted Trelawney could prove otherwise or would care. Now that's a lovely one, James snorted. You should get an O just for that, Sirius nodded eagerly. She can't even take a joke, Remus sighed, though admittedly intrigued as clearly they'd been right. Whatever Hermione had on her may have something to do with her sudden house elf fascination. Spew? James asked in confusion. Why did she make a bunch of badges encouraging people to put milk out their nose? Sirius agreed. You're disgusting, Lily snickered. What? It's what people do when they... Sirius began to defend himself, before James reached around Harry and whacked him to get him to stop, waving Harry on so they could see what this was about. And that is, Remus asked with his head cocked to the side, must be something really new. Oh, all five of them finally caught on. Well, I guess I can see Hermione's line of thinking, Lily said slowly. She couldn't find anyone to care about what was going on with the elves, so she started her own campaign. I rather like it, she finished, clearly warming to the idea. Could have gone through some better names first, Sirius snorted. Like you lot are any better, Lily said back stoutly. Marauders, that's not exactly original. I blame McGonagall, James said a little too loudly, and Harry and Lily were a little surprised to see some strain coloring all three boys now. She called us that during our first year, when we were all caught together the first time, and it had just kind of stuck. Harry turned back to the book quickly now, trying to keep reading loudly to change the subject. Neither him nor his mother really needed further explanation. Clearly McGonagall had called them that first, but if the boys' reactions were anything to go by, it had been Pettigrew who suggested they use it as their group's name. Thinking back, they'd also mentioned it had been the rats' ideas for their own nicknames. It must hurt them dearly to have an almost constant reminder of how much he'd had to do with their life, and Harry wasn't going to let it linger longer than he could. That'll get you attention at least, Sirius tried to get out around his gritted teeth. Remus forced his mind to concentrate on every letter. It was far easier to think on than other things at the moment, and instead said, SOAOFMC is kind of a mouthful. How would you even pronounce that? Still think it would have been better she'd gone with that, James shrugged. Less easy to make fun of. It's actually rather nice to see she's trying so hard, Lily grinned. If anything, I believe it will draw attention to what she's trying to do. For better or worse, let's find out, Sirius sighed. Sirius opened, then closed his mouth, deciding he didn't want to start something with Lily again. Though thankfully he seemed to have Ron to say it for him, as Sirius gave a slight laugh. That'd been pretty close to what he was going to say. Sirius, managing to give a genuine laugh again, finally managed to distract James and Remus from their school thoughts again, and Harry eagerly kept going now that he had their full attention. Ironically, it's the short-term goals she may have the most issue with, Remus said with honest interest. As you be going directly into the house elves' way of life, trying to get a hold of that. It's the other two that I can see her really making a change of, as house elves aren't the only ones suffering those problems. She could rally more troops for that cause. I think I know what Hermione wants to do when she grows up, Sirius said brightly. Take on Lily's job in the legislation department. She could be the next Minister of Magic, James agreed, with only a small portion of that being mocking. Oh, that's nice. Tell me all this after you've said everything, Harry snorted. I just love how she automatically assumes they'll go along with this, Lily chuckled, as they've given no indication before now they care. Good friends don't need to rely on their backup, Sirius said wisely. Can't deny I'd have loved to see that, Remus laughed. Yes, they all couldn't help cheering. None of them would admit, until this moment, just how truly terrified they'd all been Hedwig wouldn't show up again, and the next time they'd get a mention of Sirius would be in the papers announcing his kiss. Give him a chance to read it, James said, with an undisguised sigh of relief. You're what? The baby began wailing in shock, but Lily quickly tried to soothe him down without taking her eyes off of Sirius. James, Remus, and Lily had screeched that at about the same time, Harry had kept looking dumbstruck at the page, making Sirius wince and rub at his ear in pain, but he had a fighting look already set in place as he shot back. Good for me. Are you insane? Lily got out first. She looked like at any second she was going to start strangling him, a menacing accomplishment while holding a child. You can't come back. It's too dangerous for you. You're bleeding lucky those Dementors aren't back at the school this year, but you still can't risk anyone seeing you on the grounds. Sirius was glaring around at all of them, clearly seething. But I'm with Lily on this one, James surprised him by saying. When Sirius turned to argue with him instead, he found something quite surprising. James looked almost fragile as he watched Sirius, a description that no one could usually give to James Potter, but he looked it now. Sirius reflected that after everything that rat had put them through last year, well, the way James was looking at him now made it clear what he was thinking. He confirmed as much when he kept going in a still too tight tone. I can't hear about you going back to Azkaban, Sirius. Unless something really, really bad is happening, you need to stay as far away from Harry as you can. Harry's scar hurting again is a bad sign, Lily quickly agreed. But there's no need to put yourself in extra danger until something more concrete happens. She was still trying, futilely, to deny that the dark mark was just as terrible a problem and would bring Sirius back just as much. Sirius sighed as he glanced between the two, then he glanced at Remus, who'd remained quiet through this. He, however, just shrugged, saying, Look, I'm not judging you, Sirius. You've got more than enough people in this world doing that. I'm just begging you to think for a second. It's not logical. In fact, it's the opposite, not to mention it terrifies me. You really think I want to sit here and read you got yourself killed, well, being you? Sirius grumbled under his breath for a moment, but clearly outvoted, he instead redirected. Okay, fine. But I don't know what you're all yelling at me for. It's not like I'm going to do this tomorrow. That at least gave them all a pause, recognizing that though they feared for his future, telling him off for this now really wasn't doing any good. Harry at least managed to keep going without his panic bubbling over. Surely if they could convince him of this now, Harry could get the same thing through to him before he made it back. What signs? Harry asked. The four of them exchanged unhappy looks, but they weren't going to lie to him either. War has started a lot the same way ours did, James sighed, skipping past the time jump. Random disappearances of people, or at least one that we know of. Maybe it's just because we know who did kill poor Bertha, but I'm sure there's a lot more going on you're not hearing about. I'd like to think Dumbledore may be keeping me in on that loop, though, Sirius kept going. So maybe I know more than I put in so far. That dark mark probably gave you heart failure as well, Remus sighed. Harry smiled around at them all, happier than he could put into words that they'd actually bothered to explain all of that to him. He wasn't sure why this in particular would mean so much to him, but it was nice they weren't trying to hide this from him at least. It didn't exactly put him back in a good mood as he kept going, though. Oh, come on, pup, Sirius began whining at once. Your first reaction to something I'm doing is to turn and blame yourself. I don't want you coming back, Sirius, Harry said at once with two wide eyes. You're safer out of the country, and if telling you my scar hurt is what made you come back, and then you got. Okay, Sirius waved him down, as Harry's voice had started edging towards shouting levels, mostly directed at himself, but with the baby in the room they were trying to avoid that. All right, Harry, calm down. We've talked about this, remember. You cannot go blaming yourself for everything that I do. He had to speak a bit louder, as Harry looked to cut him off. "If hearing about something going on with you was a motivating factor in me coming back, then I regret nothing. Now give me some credit, the lot of you," he added on harshly, as he turned hard eyes on everyone in the room. "I got away with it for a year, and I was only caught because of Snape." Harry was still dithering, unable to shake this terrible fear. He didn't want Sirius coming back. It would be best if he stayed far away, which would keep him alive. He clearly wasn't winning this argument in this timeline, though, so he hoped dearly he would in Sirius' future. Sirius frowned as Harry kept going, as he'd hardly agreed Sirius was right, and this wasn't Harry's fault. "Poor Hedwig," Lily muttered absently. "I disagree," Sirius grumbled. "You've got some real mental problems." Harry shot him a nasty look, thinking this shouldn't be joked about, which Sirius matched back. As he'd argue till he was blue in the face, Harry was safer with him around. The two sat glaring at each other for a few moments before Remus cleared his throat, and Harry turned back to the book with a touch of indignation. "Temper, temper," James sighed, unable to say he wouldn't be acting the exact same way Harry was in that situation. Sirius never admitted how dangerous his actions could be, and coming back was one they all but him agreed was a terrible one. Sirius' hand twitched like he wanted to smack Harry for saying that, but Harry turned sharply and snapped. "I was just reading it. You can't tell me off for doing that yet." "Exactly," Sirius grinned back. "I ain't done it yet, so knock it off with the attitude." "You haven't denied that you would do it, though," Remus sighed. Sirius scowled at him next, but when he still said nothing to the contrary, Harry continued in seething tones. "That I'll disagree with," James sighed. "I'm glad you did tell Sirius. He's the best person to have told, but his reaction to it isn't what we were hoping for." "Well, I'm so sorry my coming back is such a bother to you lot," Sirius snarled. "I don't regret it for a second, though." "And that's our problem," Lily snapped. "You won't admit that it's even vaguely a bad idea." "Because I'm staying closer to Harry," Sirius ground out. "I don't know what you lot have been listening to, but you can't pretend that stupid first chapter never happened. Something is definitely up with Voldemort this year, and I want to be there for that. Please let me strangle him, just a little." Lily turned beseechingly to James and Remus. "Not until he actually does it," James sighed. "If in 15 years or so he does it all again, despite our warnings, then have at him." "Hey." Sirius pouted, though there was nothing mock about his outrage. Remus at least gave a small laugh, though Harry still didn't look remotely appeased. His dad's joke had only been yet another reminder that Harry should be as adamant as ever about keeping Sirius safe. None of them could stand the thought of this future actually happening to him. "Chapter's over," Harry groused, giving the book a toss to Remus. Chapter 16. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. Chapter text to guest who asked. This is a reference to Chamber of Secrets' worst birthday. Will we ever get the full story of James Potter, Lily Evans, and Heather Volson? It sounds like a good story. I had just meant it as a joke mostly that James tried to date one other girl to make Lily jealous. I hadn't planned on an actual story behind it, but since you asked, I can try to bring it up again and have James give more of a defense of it and what Lily was really thinking while it was happening. I'll slip something in next chapter about it. If ever anyone else has any questions like this, I will always deeply consider them. As always, thank you so much for the lovely reviews and comments you all send. They make my life. Remus gave Sirius one more uneasy look before he started his chapter. It was the first time he'd seen Harry and Sirius really fighting about something, and he almost felt bad that everyone was against Sirius on this, but not bad enough to endorse the idea that Sirius wasn't insane for wanting to come back. Still hoping somehow Harry might be able to convince him otherwise in the book, Remus got started. "I've had moments like that," James nodded eagerly, throwing Sirius a look in hopes he wasn't so angry at them he wouldn't play along. Sirius sighed for a moment before adding on, "Yeah, some of our best pranks came from the brilliance of the first thought in the morning." "Hopefully, this one works out for Harry," Lily muttered. "You didn't put up your homework," Remus said absently. "Risky Harry, someone could have taken that. I can't see too many people clamoring for those kinds of fortunes," Sirius said back deadpan. That cracked a grin out of all of them, albeit a sad one from Sirius as he said, "If you actually think I'll fall for that, you clearly don't know me that well." Harry muttered something inarticulately. "I still think you need it checked," Sirius snipped at him, to which Harry stuck his tongue out at him. and you didn't want to stick around for that. Lily chuckled. Oh, so pleasant, Remus smirked. I remember Filch once gave me the lovely detention of having to clean that place, James said, a little twinkle in his eyes already showing where he was going with this before he finished. For some odd reason he used that as an excuse to blame me when he found a bunch of rat skeletons in his office. Cannot imagine why, Lily snickered, while Harry fully laughed at that. That made all four of them snicker to Harry's dismay, though he recognized he deserved it after the way he treated her last night. That'll do it, yeah, Remus chuckled, as Hedwig had already shown her vanity in any other owl that wasn't her. The smile dropped off all of their faces. Even Sirius couldn't help a light shiver, though he quickly masked it by grumbling, "You have no faith in me." Harry gave him an exasperated sigh, saying, "You know, that's not it, Sirius. You just shouldn't risk." Sirius just ignored him, glaring hard at Remus. Harry cut himself off when he realized he may as well be telling the fireplace this was a bad idea, and Remus chose to keep going. Sirius sighed at that, rubbing his temple. He didn't want to worry his pup. He was trying to do the opposite here by staying closer. Clearly, though, when he looked around, they were all feeling the same way, and despite his insistence, the smallest part of him couldn't deny he'd be the first to have a panic attack if he was caught by those Dementors again. "Well, I'm so sorry having me around made your life worse," Sirius grumbled, redirecting his confusion at himself outwards. James, who had lived with this for far too many years, snapped back, "Only when you start acting like a prat, as Harry's learning." "Hey, his first lie to you." Remus snickered. "You should feel proud, Padfoot. He's already trying to figure out the best way to do that." Sirius cracked and actually began snickering, while Lily rolled her eyes. Of course it would be that to make Sirius feel better, the only person in the world who saw lying as a good thing. Sirius let his head flop back against the sofa, all humor forgotten, and already feeling exhausted. They just started this chapter. "There is a first time for everything." Lily raised a brow at this show of restraint. Remus' voice cracked on that last word. "Weeks, plural?" James asked in a too high-pitched voice. "Breath prongs," Sirius muttered, closing his eyes so he wouldn't have to see any of their faces freaking out. "It took me a while to get back to him, because I'm clearly up to something more than moving around. Don't flip out on me until we've got proof." The others couldn't help it. They were still on the edge of their seats as Remus forced himself to go on. Sirius couldn't even pretend to ignore the spasms that caused him. He'd been having nightmares about that coupled with some other things, and the fact that Harry couldn't even pretend this thought didn't scare him wasn't making any of them feel any better. Harry was feeling a little desperate and panicky at this point. Time was dragging on too long. He had to know if his godfather was going to be okay. He was fixing to throw his caution out the window and start digging right through his memories to find the source, just to know that Sirius would come out okay. But then Remus caught his breath back and kept reading very loudly to hopefully distract them all from that, and Harry acquitted he may only make things worse. "I've got my proof," James said a little breathlessly, still blinking that terrible vision Harry had painted away from his mind's eye. "Quidditch is good for you. Take that, Lily." "Love you to dear." She gave a soft laugh back she didn't really feel, but admired the attempt he gave all the same. "I should probably be terrified," Remus muttered, "considering your first class, but at this rate learning about the unforgivables would be a relief." "You're depressing me," Sirius huffed back, his smile at least trying to move past strained. "He's what now?" James shrieked that had distracted him. The baby in Lily's lap began crying in surprise, and Lily tried to deny her shaking hands as she cuddled and soothed him back down. Remus shook his ears in surprise at such a sharp volume, but after blinking down at the pages a few times and considering, he said, "I guess it's not the worst idea in the world." James turned two wide eyes on him, forcing his volume not to keep breaking decibels. He was the one to tell them using those on other people will get you put away, and now he's going to use it on them. As he kept speaking, though, some of the panic did start fading out, and after looking around at the others who all looked equally as upset, though somehow resigned, he acquitted, "Though I guess, I can't deny it could be useful. Better a teacher who will force you to do your homework until you break free than a Death Eater." "That better be the only spell he uses on them, though," Lily said dangerously. "If he decides to give them a taste of what the Cruciates feels like, I'll rip his other leg and eye off." "I get dibs," the others agreed. Harry watched them all with fascination. Through most of his young life, he'd always wondered what it would feel like if he had parents to write home to tell them how his day had gone and what he'd learned in class. He never would have dreamed of writing this type of stuff to Sirius, not now when he was so worried about him anyways. Now he was getting a first-hand account of how they'd process things, and he would never not find it intriguing to watch. They'd already realized that Dumbledore must have approved this, but the fact that Moody just so phrased it, meaning he'd actually told Moody to go and do this, gave all of them lockjaw. It didn't feel like it was a coincidence this was happening to Harry. Even if this was happening to all fourth years, it probably wasn't happenstance. This was Harry's particular curriculum. There were too many times before where they'd felt like Dumbledore was putting Harry through a little something extra. They'd all promised, though, that since the man wasn't here to defend himself, they'd try not to throw too many accusations at him, but this was really hitting the fan. How come we never got excused from class for questioning the teacher? Sirius muttered, finding it much more pleasant to crack a joke than imagine his little pup being put under that spell for any bleeding reason. Because we'd have a 0 attendance if we did pull that off, James sighed in agreement, both what he'd said aloud and what he'd been thinking. That's as accurate as it could get, Harry chuckled. That poor kid, Remus said in pity. Least Moody's being original, Sirius muttered. Harry watched all four of them tense as tight as they could go. It didn't seem to matter to them the reason and logic of this. Clearly Harry being under the influence of any unforgivable was like a nightmare come true to them. All it managed to cause Harry, though, was a flood of warmth at how clearly concerned they all were. Remus let out a blistering sigh as he read that. First the problems with Sirius, now this. How come he hadn't been able to get one of the nice chapters? Well, if it was unpleasant, then you wouldn't want to fight it, Sirius grumbled. James was practically shivering non-stop by the end of that description, so he couldn't have added something if he wanted to. That's it, Lily couldn't help but question. We went from gymnastics and squirrels to just jumping onto a desk. You've seen how high up those things are, Harry reminded with a shrug. You try doing that without a running start. Remus wasn't sure he'd read that right, because that was the start to someone being able to break through the curse. Harry was 14. He couldn't really have that sort of will, especially on his first try. Harry was watching all of them with confusion, and when they continued to just sit there gaping at him, he demanded, "What?" Sirius finally cleared up his expression and gave Harry a proud smile as he defended. "I'm really not that surprised. You managed a corporal patronus at 13, around 100 Dementors. Clearly your strength is your Dada spells." Harry flushed red in surprise at such praise, but Sirius' comment managed to shake the others awake as well. It was a startling and impressive feat for anyone to show, but Sirius was right. This wasn't the first time he showed such strong strength in character. Trying to push some of the attention off of him, Harry asked back, "Hasn't any of you fought this off?" They all went very still and quiet. This wasn't something any of them really wanted to talk about, but James broke first and whispered, "I did once," with such a disturbing look on his face. Harry was terrified to ask what he'd been told to do. Lily watched her husband, her eyes suddenly too many shades darker, but knew that Harry deserved the answer no matter how unpleasant it was. "He came home one night acting funny," she explained for what felt like the millionth time, though every single one made the experience as raw and new as if it had just happened. "I was still pregnant with you, and he came home one day, but well, he wasn't acting right." "I was there that day." Remus winced in horror, as all the possibilities of what else could have happened that day still haunted him if he wasn't. His hand went to absently rub at his throat as he tried to get out. "And well, Remus stunned me," James got out in a frosty voice. He despised having to recall this. Like the others, he'd had to recant everything he could remember for the order later, and it still gave him nightmares. Clearly no one else was getting this out, though, and he wanted to move past it. Sadly, that doesn't negate the effects of the imperious curse, so it wore off, and I went to attack him. I was actually ordered to. His face spasmed. He couldn't get that out if his life depended on it, so he hedged around. Well, anyways, I snapped out of it before I could do any real harm, but he cut off, his throat feeling like it had closed shut. Sirius' face was an ugly mask through this whole thing. He went nuts there for a moment when he'd heard, and had felt so useless at only hearing of this after the fact. He'd tried, like Remus, to figure out who done it to him, but James had never recalled anything after he'd left the house. Harry didn't think he could stand to listen to any more, even if the others could spit it out, so he was more than happy when Remus decided to move on. "Really am just blasted," Sirius said, shaking his head in utter amazement, still trying to shake past that terrible memory this stupid spell brought up. "I'll take the surprise and be grateful for it any day," Lily agreed. "If that doesn't show how impressive it is, nothing will," James murmured, "since it takes a miracle to impress Moody." "You mean you aren't?" Sirius said with mark-wide eyes. "Here I thought they had rabid bunnies around every corner." "You and your blasted rabbits," Remus grumbled. Harry frowned in confusion at the odd comment, but no one noticed. "Oh, we didn't get to hear the rest of the story," Remus pouted. "I'll tell you if you tell me what serious thing with rabbits is," Harry offered. James released a surprised snort of laughter. If anything could knock him back into this conversation, it was that. He more than happily explained. When referring to Remus' werewolf status in school, we called it his furry little problem. When anyone asked about it, Sirius said in a saint-like voice, I managed to convince them all Remus had a badly behaved rabbit. Had to keep up the gist, so I got him one that following Christmas. Of course, I didn't keep it, Remus scoffed. It would be insane of me to try and own a pet, plus most creatures dislike me. Yet he's persisted in trying to give me one nearly every bleeding holiday since. Harry was laughing so hard, it took him several moments to calm back down and explain his end. I never heard the name of the witch, but from what Moody told, she got pinned to a wall by a permanent sticking charm. Poor thing had to undress in front of her whole department to go home and get a change of clothes, and they're still up on some floor at the ministry. That's a kindness considering some of the things he could have done to her, Lily smirked, thinking that everyone knew better than to pull a stunt like that at Moody nowadays, but add 15 years to him, that was asking for trouble. They're not until the end of next year, Harry protested. They do not care one little bit, Sirius sighed. And how was that working out for her? Remus rolled his eyes. She'd stopped raising her hand and asking McGonagall to triple-check it was the same style as McGonagall's, so quite well, Harry chuckled. At least they could agree with her on something, as they all couldn't deny their own amusement at that. Such brave souls, Sirius said tragically. Rarock cakes, James said with a straight face and a snap of his fingers, the others blissfully ignoring what he'd been fixing to say. I suppose it might be a little too obvious if you asked her for some. She's chock full of them, Lily sighed. I thought you were worried about me, Sirius said with an innocent voice. Why would you take it to me? James reached around Harry like he was trying to smack him for that, but Harry was too busy laughing and being in the way. Lily muttered several foul things under her breath, none of them needed translating, as they all knew they were going to shove several poisons down Snape's throat when they got out of here. But if he touched Harry, it would get even worse for him. Excuse him, Remus spluttered. Books, plural. A chapter or two I'll give, but Merlin, man. Harry muttered his agreement, but for some odd reason was feeling regret he hadn't jumped on that one instead. That's still the best homework I've heard yet, Sirius smirked. He wasn't exactly fond of these scroots, but he couldn't deny he found them fascinating either. Joyful, flunk him out of the class so we can deal with him a little less, James scowled. Causing all of 5 of them a relapse in amusement, that joke would never get old. Please never let that fade away, Sirius begged. This is better than the time Hermione slapped him. Never thought that could be true, Remus nodded fondly, and I couldn't be happier to be wrong. Charming as ever, Lily giggled. Bless irony, James agreed. Oh, bully, Sirius chirped with real interest. He couldn't wait to see this tournament getting started. There's the bright side, Remus snickered with only half his usual amount of jesting at that, considering they all felt it a very real threat. Oh, not him, James groused. I couldn't stand rooting for someone who'd beaten Harry out of Quidditch. Harry realized that his hands were starting to shake, a now familiar but never unpainful throbbing beginning in his forehead. It pained him that his first instinct was to snap at his father for saying a negative word against Cedric, while his 14-year-old mind fully agreed with James. He was sure that was indicative of something, but he knew he would regret it if he learned the answer. Completely agree, Sirius nodded along. Harry found himself having to beat down the urge to snap at both Ron and Sirius now for even thinking of saying a mean word against Cedric, and he knew they didn't really mean it. What on earth was that about? Is there another reason not to like someone? Remus asked innocently. I'm not liking you lot very much right now, Lily shot back. Can't even argue with him, that one, Harry cackled, more than pleased at finally being distracted from this. Harry had to press his lips tight together to suppress a moan. He quite enjoyed the long absence of this being mentioned, but now that it was all coming back, that same feeling of unease was rising right back up. He tried his very best to ignore it. Thankfully, he'd had a lot of practice by now. The accents, Sirius said, with a dreamy look on his face. Do I want to know? Harry asked, with much more interest than he'd meant to, anything to keep the conversation off that tournament for a moment. Oh, please don't, Remus began to protest, but Sirius instantly ignored him and explained. I pimpled with a girl from Ugadu. That's the school they have in Africa, and she was a real. Perhaps we can continue this later, Lily quickly inserted, as she hadn't even known Sirius at that time, and she could only imagine how inappropriate this was about to get. You lot are no fun at all, Sirius pouted at her, but Remus quickly threw her a grateful look and kept going while he could. Lily gave a huffy sigh. She really wished he'd be told off for that more. I cannot imagine how that would come up in conversation, Sirius rolled his eyes. That was a bit harsh, James agreed with a wince for poor Neville. Actually, now I can see why that would come up, Remus smirked. That's quite memorable. What were you trying to do? Lily raised a disbelieving brow. When we learned that, we were supposed to switch petals from one flower to the other. We were supposed to be putting the spikes of the cactus onto our portion of the table, Harry shrugged, not wanting to admit that he'd somehow managed instead to remove his Tehran's chair. What on earth? Lily felt like she was asking for the 50th time. Hopefully they explain, Remus shrugged, several options still spinning around. I wouldn't hold your breath, Sirius sighed, thinking whatever their problem was, they clearly weren't up to explaining it to anyone. Remus looked up with a frown to indicate he was done with all the twins had said. James' frown only deepened as he said, well, that didn't really explain much of anything. They're being avoided, Sirius said thoughtfully, rubbing at his chin as he swirled his mind around. Maybe we were wrong, and it is someone at Hogwarts, someone from another house this has to do with. What could they be accusing a fellow Hogwarts student of that so bad? Remus postured. We were clearly wrong, and it doesn't have anything to do with whoever attacked Bagman, Lily sighed, then waved Remus on to keep going as they were now having a fairly circular argument. Our sibling love, Sirius gave a light smirk. At that moment I'm fairly sure they mean it, James snorted. No one liked having their conversations intruded on. How rude, Remus smirked. Should have gotten Hermione to try and ask, Harry chuckled. She might have tried another argument like she did on Binns. Who's this we? Sirius gave a disbelieving look. Harry's been left alone at all the big important things. Ron did knock out that troll, Remus said fairly. And he stood up to your arse. That's a dangerous feat in itself, James smirked. Plus going into the chamber and the forest when he had a good idea what he'd find, Sirius agreed with a little nod, officially taking back his crack. This is actually starting to depress me, Lily muttered. She hated sitting around and thinking of all these things Harry and his friends had to go through. There's that, too, Sirius switched back, like he still wanted to press his point. None of them have done any of that stuff with an audience around, and we know at least Hermione'll freeze under pressure. She was a first year, Harry defended. Sirius still shrugged, giving Harry an obvious look, which the others suddenly realized he may be doing to try and get through Harry's head that he could fantasize about this all day, but he didn't want Harry in this tournament any more than any of them. Harry either didn't realize that's what Sirius was doing or was ignoring him, which seems a little biased. Lily shook her head, as they must be prone to supporting their own school. You'd think they'd get judges from other countries. I think it may be so that they can show how impartial they can be, Remus offered. After all, a judge from Durmstrang giving a high score to someone from Hogwarts would make them seem fair and equal. That's if they actually do it, though. James rolled his eyes. Sirius in particular gave a shudder at the thought of that, while Harry asked, What's a cockatrice? It's a dragon with only 2 legs and the head of a rooster, Remus said, with a disbelieving look that students would have to put up with this. They're born from a male rooster laying an egg, being hatched by a toad. Thank you, because that wasn't a close enough description to how a basilisk's born, James muttered. It was amazing how the simple matter of the egg being from a male or female chicken made the difference. How would a male chicken lay an egg? Harry politely interrupted to clarify. Remus' pleasant grin only grew as Harry kept asking for more as he briefly added, "Some hens can possibly change gender after they lay an egg, but they don't switch back to hens. So as long as the switch happened, it is then technically a rooster's egg. It has the ability that if it breathes on you, it can kill you, which is a fair reason those judges made a run for it." Now even Harry agreed with his dad. This was sounding far too much like a basilisk for his pleasure. Remus was clearly ignoring all of them as he continued his rambling. "Merlin, do I pity those contestants, but a surefire way to keep it at bay would be to have a weasel around or to have it look at itself in the mirror. So while the challenge of capturing one is there, at least it seems doable." "Can we please change the subject now?" Sirius begged. These things were far too close to dragons, and now basilisks, for his wanting to keep going. Remus pouted at them. This was such a rarely mentioned creature he didn't get to talk about them much, but didn't argue the point either as he knew how uncomfortable it was making both of his friends. "I feel like you hear that a lot," Lily snorted. "But that title's such a mouthful." Sirius rolled his eyes. "I'm sure she can understand why they tightened it up a bit." "Why would it?" James asked with genuine interest. They had nothing to do with the school's history. "It's the principle of the matter, James," Lily sighed. "It's an injustice not to mention the fact that slaves live on the premises." "Never heard you saying anything about this before, Hermione," Sirius grumbled. "I never put as much thought into it as she clearly has," Lily scowled back, "which I'm deeply regretting." There was a lull where Lily and Sirius kept glaring at each other, each clearly deciding if they were actually going to revisit their earlier argument already. But then Remus decided to keep reading loudly while he still could. Lily switched her expression to Harry, wishing her son would take more of an interest, as he must see how wrong that is. He'd hardly been treated any better at the Dursleys, but Harry was thoroughly avoiding her eye as well. "I feel like that could be classified as harassment." Remus raised a brow at just how forceful she was being. "Best way to keep up attention," Lily smirked. "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds like a bad thing," Sirius muttered quietly enough only Harry and James heard him. "And how would you put it?" Harry murmured back. He may not have been as gung-ho about this as Hermione, but he couldn't deny either he didn't like the ideas of more Darbys being out there. He just knew better to go badgering other people about it. "You ever watch them do their work, pup?" Sirius whispered, waiting for Harry to shake his head no before finishing. "Trust me, they're singing show tunes and beaming the whole time. They think they've got it made, and Hermione, or Lily, telling them otherwise will not make them any happier." Lily narrowed her eyes suspiciously. She could tell they were clearly saying something over there, but Remus wasn't pausing to let it come out. "Maybe because Hermione can't prove her point either," James shrugged, throwing his hands up at once when Lily began scowling at him. "I'm just saying, most of the students aren't even aware there are house elves there, so they can't get too worked up about something they've never seen." Lily rolled her eyes, but wasn't going to say anything to that at least. "There's the Sirius of the school," Remus muttered. "Can't believe she actually started to say that to those two," Sirius snickered. "Think you can hardly define it as nicking," James smirked in remembrance. "They practically give it away if you poke your nose in." "No," Sirius drawled out, throwing this at Lily since Hermione wasn't around to hear. "It's because that's about as much as they're capable of understanding. Simple, normal chores. They can hold a conversation," Lily threw back at once. "You can't really say they're un. I didn't say they were troll levels of stupid." Sirius cut her off, instantly regretting saying anything as he should have known Lily would snap back. "Just that they aren't smart enough for anything higher. Didn't Darby prove that when he tried to save Harry's life by killing him?" Lily wavered, recognizing that as she'd never personally held a conversation with a house elf, she was being a bit of a prat by trying to say anything for them. Sirius actually smirked, pleased to see he may have gotten through to her that time, but Remus still kept going before either of them could rally, which instantly distracted them from anything else. "There's the proper response," James muttered. Not loud enough Remus would stop, but so at least Harry knew he was happy. "Actually, no, it wasn't. But you can't blame me for lying about that." Sirius gave an easy smile, slouching back into the couch with an insufferably proud look as far as the others were concerned. The others sighed. recognizing that Sirius had clearly gone off and done this probably moments after he'd gotten Harry's letter. "You're welcome," Sirius huffed, glaring at James in particular. James scowled at the opposite wall for a moment, working furiously to stop himself snapping that Sirius was being an idiot, before turning back and saying reluctantly, "Thank you." Sirius beamed, clearly starting to preen himself any moment now that he'd at least gotten someone's approval. "Why do I even bother?" Lily moaned, rubbing furiously at her temple. Remus gave her a comforting pat on the shoulder, completely in the same boat as her. It was depressing when he thought about it, though, that Lily wouldn't have been there to tell Sirius in person he was being an idiot while helping him go into hiding. That Lily and James would never again be there to deal with Sirius, and all the insane things he was going to get himself up to. Remus would be alone in making sure he helped to keep his last friend alive, and that thought was pretty terrifying considering more than half the time he'd been an encouragement to Sirius' terrible plans. He had no faith he could talk Sirius out of anything. To be honest, he'd probably be so guilt-ridden for having spent 12 years thinking the worst of Sirius, he'd help him with anything to make amends. He'd probably be in the same pot of hot water as Sirius soon enough when the others realized he'd be just as bad as Sirius, and was probably helping him in any way he could. At least, he certainly hoped so. He'd much rather deal with that than just bloody falling back out of the picture. Remus hadn't realized he'd sunk so deeply into his thoughts until he realized Lily was snapping her fingers in front of his nose to get his attention, and had to shake his head slightly to realize Sirius was talking to him. "Mooney, would you get a grip? You've spent more than enough time worrying about me. Can't you just pretend for a moment this is a good thing?" He mustered up a smile for his friend, saying, "So long as it's just for pretend, then sure." Sirius rolled his eyes, while Remus quickly jumped back into the book before he could let his thoughts stray anywhere else. "Well, would you looky there. Padfoot's actually showing some intelligence." Lily tried to hide her beaming smile with a smirk. Sirius gave her a challenging look back, though there was no force at all as he snapped, "Hardy har, Lil, this coming from the girl who once got herself stuck up a tree. You're not the poster child for smarts. And who said you could call me that?" He added on, doing a double take as he fully took in what Lily had said. Lily went beet red at the reminder, snapping back, "That has nothing to do with your levels of idiot. That was done to me, and I can call you whatever I want to." She actually finished that with uncertainty, though, as she'd only ever once referred to Peter by his nickname, and they had all laughed that off. She hadn't really meant to do it to Sirius now. It had just slipped out in her desire to show she wasn't really as mad at him as she put on. She knew she could never put into words how grateful she was Sirius really was out there looking after her son, even if he did give her grey hair along the way. Sirius could only leave her on tenterhooks for a few moments more before his expression broke, and he gave her an indulgent smile as he responded, "Right, well, you do that then, dear." Lily couldn't even begin to hide her smile at that, while the other three exchanged bemused looks at the two. For some reason, Harry was all for extending this, as he wanted nothing more than to never get to this tournament, so he asked, "How did you get stuck up a tree?" Lily sighed, wanting to throw Sirius a nasty look for the reminder, but she couldn't seem to hold it against him any more as she explained, "I had this friend, and it felt like at least once a week her cat wouldn't come back at the end of the night like the rest of them always do, so I was out on the grounds helping her look for it. Well, we found it, up a tree on the edge of the forest. My friend, her name was Mary. She was afraid of heights, so I offered to climb up there and get it down. I wouldn't recommend using a spell to get a cat out of a tree, by the way," she added on when she saw he was about to ask. "They do not take kindly to that, and they come down one giant ball of fur and claws. So anyways, I scaled up there, but the moment I was in arm's length of it, it shimmied itself down the tree like the little shit it was. I began climbing down myself, when I got myself snagged on a branch. I don't mean my shirt might have got ripped a little if I just pulled. I mean I somehow got so stuck that if I kept going, I was going to have to make it back to Gryffindor Tower in my skivvies." Harry looked properly disgusted at his mother saying that, but Lily hardly seemed to notice, as she was still glaring at Sirius through the majority of the story. Well, Mary got a hold of her cat, and she knew the second she put that problem back on the ground, he'd just scale another tree, and we'd be in exactly the same situation. So she was going to go drop him in the first empty room she could find, then come back to help me. No, she wasn't going to stun her cat, Sirius, Lily snapped when she saw him opening his mouth to say something. A look of agitation continued to increase as she said, "So Mary ran off, and who should come across me in that bloody situation but Black? What were you even doing out there anyways?" Having been so mortified by the end of this, she'd never brought it up since. "That's on a need-to-know basis," Sirius began to say at the same time Remus buted in saying, "He was probably out there to snog some girl." "Mooney," Sirius rolled his eyes. "That was a highly kept secret." "That the whole bloody school knew," he shot back with the same eye roll. Sirius switched back to Lily then, batting his eyes at her lovingly as he told Harry from there, "You just know she was thrilled to see me. We were on the best of terms at that time." Harry snorted lightly. It wasn't hard to pick up on the sarcasm he was using. Clearly this was at a time when his mother was still friends with Snape. "So being the gentleman I was, I climbed up there and got her down. I managed to only tear up enough of her shirt. She was still decent, and then we both got down and parted ways as bosom friends." "You were even more of an ass back then," Lily informed him primly. "You lorded over me for the next month that you saved my life. Pissed off Prongs as well," Sirius said without a hint of remorse. He would have loved nothing more than to be her knight in shining armor for that moment. "Plus, I wouldn't have teased her so mercilessly about it," James agreed, not even bothering to hide his laughter at this retelling. Harry couldn't help laughing at the end, thinking he'd much rather sit around all day hearing stories about their school life than his own, but he was clearly outvoted as Remus was looking at him expectantly. Knowing he couldn't delay forever, Harry gave a nod to indicate he was done so that he could continue. "With any luck, you didn't say that name out loud," James muttered. "I didn't," Harry assured, as Ron and Hermione knew perfectly well who it had been from. Harry still couldn't help a slight frown. He loved his owl, and she was a proud creature, so she wasn't going to like the next time he wrote to Sirius and didn't use her. Sirius' advice was sound and a good idea, but it still prickled him that just because he hadn't got some common brown bird he couldn't use her. "I'm going to pretend you said better," Sirius sniffed. Then Sirius really smiled, giving a gloating look to Harry who couldn't deny the smile back. He wouldn't have admitted that out loud for fear it would prove Sirius' point, which Harry still disagreed with as he shouldn't be anywhere near him in fear the Ministry would find out, but he couldn't deny it either. "There's the bright side," Remus chuckled. "I find that rather rude," Lily sniffed. "The people from the other school shouldn't care what's in the student's hair." "I doubt they even would have noticed," James agreed. "Doesn't seem likely," Sirius shook his head in thought as he mulled it over. "Nah, that's way too far to fly," James disagreed. Harry felt a small moment hit him, like he may have been closer than his dad was thinking. "Both of those are likely, though they'd still have to take the Thestrals in carriages to get up there, and that's not nearly dramatic enough," Remus chuckled. "You have to be 17 to enter the tournament this year," Lily reminded, "so I'm sure everyone who is appearing could do that." "And there's that," Harry agreed, "which I can imagine will still hold true for this instance," James said. Sirius went a very ugly color in shock at the very idea, but had the sense not to flip out as he knew no one would be stupid enough to do that. "Yes, because that's not stupid," Harry laughed. Lily let out a surprised whistle of appreciation at that description. "Abraxan horses," Remus said with undisguised intrigue. "Those are only native to France. I've never seen them in person." "Well, to me," Sirius began in tones that already had Remus scowling at him, "it sounds like all you have to do is picture an elephant with wings, but more horse-like. And white," James happily added on. "Palominos are tan with white manes, you twits," Remus sighed. "Well, excuse us," Sirius said without a drop of remorse. "How about you and I go on holiday there and see some?" Lily told Remus while shooting his two friends a look. "They can stay back and stare at a wall all day. It's the only thing they'd appreciate." Neither heard the slam. They were still too busy laughing at their own wit. Remus gave her a grateful smile before deciding to move on. "I'm sure that was a comfortable landing," Harry muttered randomly. At the beginning of the description, Sirius and James Snickers trailed off, and they listened in confusion. "I thought it was because of how many students would be arriving," Lily murmured in surprise. "She's a half-giant, too," Sirius raised a brow in surprise. "Thank you, Captain Obvious." Remus rolled his eyes, not hiding his own shock. Hagrid, and by extension this woman, were a very rare occurrence, but Sirius' comment was still idiotic. She actually may have Hagrid beat in height just a bit, Lily smiled, if she's wearing high heels. Thank you for that wonderful observation, love, James chuckled. I somehow doubt that's an issue, Sirius smiled lightly. Oh wow, that's the headmistress for Beauxbatons, Lily spluttered, getting over one shock to run into another. Congrats to her, Remus smiled warmly. Oh yeah, these people I brought along, James snorted. You're not the only one, I'm sure, Sirius agreed. It is colder out here than in France, Lily agreed. Though I am sad not one of them thought to bring something warmer. They must have had a general idea of where they were going. Wanted to show off more, James shrugged. Harry felt a shiver roll down his spine at that name, though he had no clue as to why. He looked around curiously to see if anyone else recognized it, but was disappointed to see no one give much thought to it. That's probably true, Remus snorted. She hasn't met Hagrid yet, Harry grinned, knowing full well that Hagrid could take care of anything, even if he did prefer the more dangerous ones. Expensive, Lily raised a brow in surprise. So I can hope this won't go on your ever-growing list of pets then, James smiled. Lily nodded her agreement, then shook her head as she was still boggling at how much they must drink of this. Nah, I sincerely doubt they bring the same thing, Sirius shrugged. It's not like they asked each other in advance, Remus pointed out. They might have. A Durmstrang school arriving by horse carriage, James raised a challenging brow. I somehow doubt it. Stereotyping, Lily snipped. James stuck his tongue out at her, since clearly no one else was going to argue against him. Oh, that would be a nightmare, Lily shuddered. Them running all over the grounds. Wandering into the forest and populating, James agreed solemnly. I think I'd prefer to hear they all came down sick with something instead. Ah, Sirius began in genuine confusion, but Remus was too curious to let anyone postulate. That is so cool. James squealed, his mind running in all sorts of directions as he tried to guess before Remus could say how they were traveling by water. It's a ship, Sirius crowed. That certainly is one way to travel, Remus agreed, his head bobbing so much with excitement it was likely to fall off. Oh, please tell me you get a tour of that, James begged Harry, his mind already visualizing all the pirate-like stuff that was most likely aboard. Harry gave a childlike laugh back, hoping very much for the same thing as Remus eagerly read on a full description. Remus still sounded like a giddy child as he read about that, though none of the others would have been any better. Lily was even imagining this sight in her mind's eye and couldn't deny the beauty of the scene, even if she'd never grown up with fantasies of pirates like most boys had at some point. She did voice aloud, though. Now I'm half wishing this hadn't been hosted at Hogwarts. I want to know how they would have traveled to another school. That's a really good question, Harry agreed. Let me know if you think of anything. Sirius made a funny sound, thinking he was all the more lucky he wasn't shipped off there now, as he might have come out looking like that as well. Oh, that makes sense. Hermione did say they came from a colder climate, Remus agreed. Well, that was sweet, Lily smiled. But if the poor thing's feeling sick, I do wonder why he came along. He probably got sick on the way there, James shrugged. Harry gasped in shock, but when a prod from both James and Sirius still left him looking like a gaping fish, Remus read out eagerly. Victor Crumb. Sirius all but shouted, nearly bouncing in his seat at once. You're going to get to spend the year watching a professional Quidditch player walk around Hogwarts. Bloody hell, you get to see the coolest things, James groaned, nearly vibrating in place as a million questions went buzzing around his mind what he wanted to ask him. Remus was snickering without remorse as his two friends kept babbling like this, and they'd mocked him for being excited about a rare breed of horse. Harry broke out of his shock as well and looked just as delighted as either of them, quickly joining in on the conversation, saying how he hoped to maybe get some tips from him. Even as Remus handed the book to her, and Lily found her spot, she realized they were still going full steam. So still smiling, she got up and snuck off to the kitchen to go and fix dinner without any of them noticing. Remus was quickly wrangled into the boys' argument to settle some debate. So when Lily came back to announce the food was ready, she had to say it 3 times to get through the lot of them. They ate in peace for what felt like the first time in ages. This was definitely their favorite book by far. The Voldemort mentions still terrified them if they thought about it too long, but they could brush that off and hope it would stop before they progressed any further. They truly hoped they could get through the rest of this book in the same manner. Alicat 3 actually has a story called Pensive, and several of the chapters in that story are moments like the one I just described, except in a full one-shot. I'd recommend it for more marauder moments. Funny story about this one random, seemingly unimportant line that I can't resist sharing with you all. I once saw online someone say that Harry Potter isn't realistic enough because it took place in the 90s, but not one girl had ever been mentioned wearing a butterfly. Below that, someone posted this one line, and I cracked up laughing hysterically as I just thought of someone furiously flipping through pages for this moment, just to prove that person wrong. I sat around for like 10 minutes trying to come up with something cool, but I really was at a loss. It would have been kind of funny if they all rode the Strals there, apparently arriving by nothing, but there's no way they would have flown that far. It's as bad a travel as Broome, honestly. I was also really angling towards the idea they all got there somehow from underground. You know, Beauxbatons got there by flying, Durmstrang by water, Hogwarts somehow would have dug a tunnel the whole way there or something. Okay, now I'm rambling and need to stop. So let me know if you have any ideas. And please don't suggest by dragon that also crossed my mind, but I just cannot picture anyone, even Hagrid, taming one to pull that off. There is no point to that second asterisk story, but I can't read that anymore without thinking of that moment. Hope you enjoyed. Chapter 17. The Goblet of Fire. Chapter text loved every single suggestion you guys offered. Thanks so much for the time you take to do so. To the Bad Wolf. Thanks, I always love knowing what your favorite part of the chapter is. To Cartlin. Response. Well, you certainly managed to highlight all the bad of the series, and I'm not really going to argue with any of the points you made. Those are your opinions, and I respect that. What I will say, though, and maybe I'm speaking with a touch more nostalgia than is called for here, but personally, I think there's a lot more magic to this series that comes from more than just the wands. I love these characters. Their actions are human and believable, and they very often have to deal with the consequences of the oftentimes poor decisions they make. I've tried my best in writing this to show both the good and the bad of all of these, and I hope that's come through, and doesn't disappoint in the end. HP. Lily hadn't been this happy about the book for this long since Harry's first year. And even then, by this point, her son had been in more than one deadly situation. Of course, she couldn't deny the Voldemort mentionings, but Harry was at school now where Dumbledore would even keep the worst of that away from him. She was all for hearing about her son sitting in the stands and enjoying this tournament, so after she handed the baby to Remus, that reminder she gave the boys actually quieted them down so she could start. Are you sure? Because I don't think he got that the first dozen times, Lily snorted. Quite being a killjoy, Lily, Sirius shot back. Just imagine for a moment that your idol was around school, you'd be acting the same way. Lily shrugged at that, not denying it. I know I can't, James agreed. Actually, that just makes him all the more interesting, Remus smiled. Shows that he's thinking outside of his career. Most others his age would have dropped everything. I can't see why he wouldn't, Sirius snickered. Starting to wonder if this is why they told them to do just that, Lily mused. If you were worried about being homesick, you shouldn't have come, James snorted. It probably is to them, Lily shrugged. They were all wondering that, though. Oh yes, I'm so sure Hermione scooting one seat over would have convinced him to sit over there, Sirius snickered, not pretending for 1 second he wouldn't have been just as bad. Now why does that feel like a bad omen? Remus rolled his eyes. He'd heard plenty of bad things about that school from Sirius, though, so maybe he was being biased. There's a tragedy, James pouted. I think it's good for him, Sirius said with a bit of a smug look. He clearly needs all the help he can get. Maybe Crumb will convince him to give up on his own team altogether when he finds out how bad the little brat is. Now who's being a hypocrite? Lily rolled her eyes, considering he was being just as bad seconds ago. That I wouldn't doubt, Harry said with some sympathy, as he lived that problem, causing all 5 of them to start snickering, knowing Ron wasn't kidding. He'd probably beg the house elves never to wash his bedding again if Crumb even sat on it. I can only imagine how much of an experience this is for them, Remus said with honest interest, his own mind spinning as for the first time he wondered what other wizard schools were really like. This is getting Carlin creepy, Lily snorted. Leave him be, James rolled his eyes. He's star-struck. His best friend is one of the most famous names alive, Remus reminded with a slight wince. And he's used to that, Sirius waved him off. But there's a difference in a household name and a star name, and Crumb is a star. Lily and Remus exchanged bemused looks. Clearly they weren't getting through to these two any better than they would Ron. Guess it's a French thing, Harry shrugged. Oh, she's going to be a lovely one, Lily scowled. Who came to someone else's school and did a stunt like that? Thank you, Remus grumbled in agreement. Eat your fill, Sirius said with honest envy. Sometimes foreign food's the best. Ever had a s'mores? Those things will give your head a spin. Harry looked at him quizzically, but decided against asking. That actually sounds kind of good, James said with interest. He didn't get to eat seafood enough. Really, each school only brought 10. Remus asked in surprise. That seemed like a pretty big ship for so few students for the cup to choose from. They don't want the whole of their 7th years missing a whole year, I guess, Lily shrugged. Oh, the poor thing. Lily couldn't help but tisk, though her worry for Harry being around those Scroots increased if they were even starting to give Hagrid a problem. Those are really going to turn out to be something to have done that to Hagrid, Remus agreed, missing the concerned part of her tone, his mind still caught on the intrigue of those things, causing all 5 of them to start snickering in total agreement. I tell her I was going to eat the whole thing for that reason alone. Lily rolled her eyes. Well, well, well. Sirius. Laughter continued even louder. Best hope she doesn't turn out to be one of the champions, James said mildly. I might disown Ron if he starts voting for his new love interest over Hogwarts. Harry blinked in confusion at his dad, just knowing there was something in what he'd just said, but Lily only gave them an indulgent smile before moving on. I'm sure Ron loves every bit of it, Remus muttered, causing Lily to snort, which she quickly tried to hide as a cough as she moved on. I think Ron's been having one too many dreams about those, Sirius said with a knowing look, and now he's seeing them everywhere. Harry cocked his head to the side, a little spot where he was sure he may have said something to that, but it was such a small thing it hardly registered. Did I detect a hint of jealousy? Lily asked. Just because Harry doesn't go for Blans doesn't mean there are not a dozen other guys watching, Remus shrugged. Least Ron's not the only one in that boat, James chuckled. I'm sure your female best friend just loved that one, Lily scowled on Hermione's behalf, causing an eruption of giggles from the others at Harry's expense, who was now wishing he'd gone back and sewn his mouth shut at some point. I'm going to give you that one, Lily, Sirius said, with a winning smile Harry was still trying to ignore. Hermione is definitely jealous of someone. Harry didn't react. He was still too busy keeping a steady eye on the carpet. The question is who? Lily agreed with honest interest. Of course she may have been acting like a prat again. Just because Hermione had 2 boys for friends didn't mean she had to have a crush on one of them. Still, it couldn't feel good for the poor thing that neither of them ever complimented her like that. Bagman's back. Sirius unbelievably brightened all the more. You've now got 2 Quidditch stars walking around Hogwarts. I can't believe I won't get a chance to meet them. Remus was sorely tempted to tell his friend off for possibly having mixed priorities then, but Lily had already rolled his eyes at him and moved on. I think I found the rest of our judges, James said in surprise. Why them, though? Harry said quickly, more than happy to hear about anything that wasn't girls at the moment. They're from our ministry, like you guys said earlier. Shouldn't they get someone that has no relation to us? Don't ask us, we didn't put it together, James shrugged. Well, there's that too, James agreed. The other 2 judges might not show up until later. Why wouldn't they show up with the rest of them? Lily asked. Again, James shrugged. He was guessing as much as the rest of them. Poor Ron, Sirius said sincerely. Maybe he won't change colors after the meal so he can go up and talk to her, ask how she liked dinner. You say that likes it so easy, Harry muttered without thinking, knowing he'd never be able to stammer out such a thing to Cho. It is with practice, Sirius said at once, his eyes lighting as he watched Harry flush slightly, who was clearly regretting having opened his mouth, but did indeed watch Sirius with polite, if dumbfounded, interest as he launched into a full volley of the number of topics he'd gotten started with that had landed him with dates. James watched with a rising sense of verdant eyes and quickly turned away to tune them out. Sirius had always made jokes that his kids would have to come to their Uncle Padfoot for dating advice. seeing as James had only ever gotten together with one girl in school and Heather had asked him out first. He'd only agreed and dated her for a total of 3 months to try and make Lily jealous during their 4th year. When that stunt clearly wasn't working, and James was starting to feel bad for leading a girl on when all he kept doing was watching his favorite redhead, he dumped her much to her protest. Of course, once he'd gotten his dream in his first date with Lily, he'd never looked back with regret. But Sirius had never quite seemed able to let the joke go that any future kids of theirs would have to turn to anyone but their parents for dating advice. Lily hadn't been much better, seeing as she'd basically been a social pariah to the male population of the school for a long time, having hung out with Snape. And then once they'd stopped being friends, any suitors she did have mysteriously wound up in the hospital wing, though no one, marauders included, would take credit for why. Of course, neither parent would go back and change it. But now that they realized they wouldn't even be there to witness Harry growing up and even trying to talk about these things, the wedding ring on his finger was more than proof enough he'd long since figured out anything Sirius was currently telling him. Watching Sirius dole this out was definitely rubbing them the wrong way. Lily shared a commiserating look with her husband before clearing her throat loudly and saying, "All right, Sirius, I put up with having to watch all that. Don't make me relive it." Then she started reading again loudly before he could protest it was all just for fun. Before turning his attention back to her, though, Harry shot his dad a grateful look and mouthed, "Thank you." If he was under the impression James had put Lily up to stopping that, James wasn't going to correct him. Should I be worried they've already got burials started?" Harry asked with concern, not realizing the terrible wince this came with may have a deeper meaning than his first layer of concern. "I said casket, not coffin," Lily corrected with a small smile. "A casket is a nicer way to say coffin," Harry corrected right back with a very uneasy look. "Relax, pup," Sirius snickered. "You'll see in a minute." Harry was still watching them all, clearly not any kind of comforted, so Lily decided not to keep him in suspense too much longer. "I honestly believe the second," Remus agreed. "Nope. Guess we should all just get ready for Britain to be accused of being biased," James shrugged as he finally got the final answer for that. "Assuming Hogwarts even wins," Remus said with a challenging smirk back, in no way meaning it, just looking to pick a fun jab at his friend and see the reaction. James puffed up, fully preparing to defend their school that there was no contest, but Lily still chose to ignore the both of them. One glance at her son, and she could tell he was already turning green. Clearly any talk of this was hurting him, as he must have a memory of who did win, but bringing it up now would do no good to him. Harry couldn't help it. The closer this tournament got to getting started, the worse he was feeling. He hadn't felt so terrible since the lead-up of finding out Pettigrew was still alive. Clearly something terrible happened during this tournament, and the more he tried to push away any feelings he was getting, the harder his head was starting to pound. "Oh," Harry murmured. He supposed a magical object would be the most fair in selecting the students for this. It certainly wouldn't be biased. "Well, how does that work?" Harry couldn't help but ask, forcing the buzzing out of his ears for a moment. His head felt like it was being stuffed, and perhaps further conversation about the goblet wouldn't help, but it was better than trying to ignore it, which was apparently doing no good. "How does just writing your name down make the goblet determine anything?" "The Goblet of Fire is a deeply powerful magical object," Lily said as she cast her mind back, trying to think up anything she might once have heard about this. "I know that the founders of Hogwarts and those who started Beauxbatons and Durmstrang all had a hand in creating this fire. It was designed to absorb the essence of whoever put something in its fire and judge those who were worthy." "That's pretty cool," James said honestly. "Starting to wish all the more I'd had a chance at this," Sirius agreed with a sigh. "Well, that'll do it," Remus chuckled. "Won't stop those like the twins trying to get around it," Sirius disagreed with a wicked grin. The longer his mother continued on this part of Dumbledore's speech, the lower Harry's heart sank. Surely he must be misunderstanding this feeling, though. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with him. Right. He must just be feeling bad for whoever the Hogwarts student was. "I don't see what the lecture's for," James rolled his eyes. "The Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students wouldn't have come if they weren't willing to go all the way, and anybody at Hogwarts who puts their name in should understand by now what they're getting themselves into." Can't say he didn't warn them, Remus shrugged. Theoretically, Lily scoffed, but do they really think Dumbledore won't account for that? Maybe he won't, James said eagerly. Sometimes the simplest solutions get overlooked. Harry tried to latch onto this light-hearted conversation, trying to convince himself that maybe he was just worried for one of the Weasley twins. Maybe they got in and they regretted it, something other than his own self being involved in this. Age is a number, Sirius scoffed. Hermione can do a potion most 6th and 7th years can't, and everyone's got different strengths. Theoretically, any student could win this. I'm still happy they can't try, Lily murmured with a protective eye on her hair bare, growing more concerned the longer she kept going that Harry somehow kept losing a color, the longer she dragged on. She couldn't imagine why. What on earth did he have to be so worried about? Harry gave a blithe smile to show how much he was kidding with that thought. So, why did that terrible idea somehow make every one of his feelings grow 10 times worse? Like Fred said, he can't do anything about it, Remus chuckled. If the goblet sets up a contract the moment their name's in, no one can do anything to get them out of it. No one noticed Harry's hands starting to shake, and he quickly tried to tuck them out of sight. You sure he said he and not she? Sirius couldn't help but grin at Lily. She ignored him. Ron's going to be so much fun this year, James snickered. If he's not freaking out about being around his Quidditch idol, he's going to be drooling after a girl. In the excitement of his name being revealed, they'd almost forgotten that Crumb was apparently feeling under the weather. Now knowing who it was that was supposedly sick, the four who had never met him in person couldn't help but scowl lightly, wondering how much he used his fame around school, which instantly seemed to clarify the situation for them. Karkaroff was clearly being chummy with his star of a student, but that in no way extended to any other student. He shouldn't speak to that boy like that, so he'd made a mess. There was no reason to insult him in public like that. Oh, joy, James muttered in disgust. Please don't tell me he'll turn into another Diggory Senior, Sirius sniffed. Subtle, Lily hissed, wanting to give them all a smack for gawking like that. Well, what's this now? Remus yelped, trying to lean around Lily and look at the book himself. Lily shoved his face back out of the way, but it didn't erase her own surprise and unease as she began. Ah, are you really thinking what I am? That Moody might know Karkaroff the same way Snape does, Sirius agreed at once. His eyes suddenly narrowed in a whole new way. Can't imagine why anyone else would look like that around an aura. Are you telling me an old Death Eater managed to be head of a school? Lily balked in disgust at that idea. A Death Eater managed to be teacher at a school, James reminded bitterly. It's not too much of a step up. Lily sighed and turned back to the book, wondering if they were all being too suspicious. There could be another reason Karkaroff would be afraid of Moody, though she couldn't think up one right now. Harry had so much practice of late, it wasn't too hard to keep his expression as steady and neutral as possible, so as not to reveal that his first instinct was to say they were all right on point with this one. It wasn't any more encouraging that this may be where he had known Karkaroff's name. Harry gave a blistering sigh. It wasn't a pleasant reminder that his presence had caused a whole block-up of the Great Hall, but for once even realizing how famous he was still nicer to think about than whatever was driving his mind crazy recently. Well, that's not encouraging, James muttered, his fingers starting to tap out a rhythm on his knee in agitation. Does it go above it? James asked with high interest, his mind already spinning on how he'd get his broom into the hall and pass his name into the goblet before anyone could stop him. I'm sure it goes in the full sphere of its diameter, Lily grumbled without looking up. Yeah, I can see Harry's point on that, Remus agreed. Oh, keep up, Ron, Sirius scoffed, his eyes lighting like a child. I hope his brothers get it, James wriggled in place. Can't even blame them, Remus chuckled. He probably would have as well. All four boys felt like they were holding their breaths as well, fingers crossed that if they could pick their Hogwarts champion, one of the twins would be it. Lily paused with an astounded look on her face before bursting out laughing. Every one of them were quick to join in. It was a pity they hadn't made it, but glory, it had nearly been worth it just for them to receive this lovely mental image. Lily caught her breath back first and had to read slightly louder than normal to make sure her rowdy boys could still hear her. The good ones always know how to laugh at themselves, Remus agreed, wiping a happy tear away as he still beamed down at the book. At least Dumbledore appreciates the attempt, Sirius sighed happily. There's the proper friend as well. James was still chuckling under his breath and made no attempts to stop soon. All of their faces couldn't help but drop at the reminder, as so far Harry had a terrible track record of this holiday. That must end this year, though. Nothing this year had anything to do with Harry. Unless another troll got in, Harry should just watch the champions get selected and go to bed as excited as everyone else. Sirius looked properly disgusted at the very thought, snapping, "No way would I go for a Slytherin being the face of Hogwarts. I'd go for Durmstrang first." "You're such a prat," Lily snapped at once, eyeing him carefully to see if he really meant that. "Ah, he didn't mean it." James rolled his eyes, still not looking any happier himself as he grumped, "but I can't deny I won't be rooting for anyone who isn't a Gryffindor as well." Lily had to fight down the impulse to whack them both over the heads. "Thank you, Harry. My point exactly," Sirius nodded, waving his hand towards Harry like that set his point in stone. Remus lifted a pillow in one hand and gave Lily a questioning look, but she shook her head, and he put it back down with a slight pout. Harry was rubbing the bridge of his nose in clear agitation, as far as the others were concerned, because he was trying not to laugh that he agreed with Sirius, but deep down he was fighting off word vomit that this wasn't going to be a problem, that maybe his dad had hit a little closer to the mark. Oh, sweet. James and Sirius cheered at once. "Now she'll get my vote any day," Remus snickered. Harry was practically beaming now, thinking that Angelina must be it. She made perfect sense with everything he'd been thinking. She was a Gryffindor, and of course he'd be worried if one of his fellow Quidditch teammates entered. He dutifully ignored that there was no reassurance from his gut on that statement, keeping his mind blissfully ignorant of anything else now that he seemed to have slightly settled. "Good on her," Lily couldn't help but agree. "Though it must feel like an injustice to the twins," Sirius said sadly. "It really does feel like they got cheaped out since they just didn't have a birthday in time." The others just shrugged. Even if they did agree, they couldn't do anything about it. Harry could not stop the convulsion that caused him, drawing concerned looks from all around, but all he could offer was a weak smile in return and a listless shrug saying he had no idea what his problem was. Lily pursed up her lips for a moment. Harry really was starting to worry her, as clearly something was deeply bothering him, but she knew better than to ask him about it. "Why were they passing your table?" James asked in surprise. "They're at the opposite end of the hall. They were going to talk to some other Gryffindors down a bit," Harry murmured, clearly not distracted from whatever was bothering him. "It's October, and you haven't gone to see him yet." James balked, since this had seemed like a regular occurrence Harry's first and second year. The only reason they hadn't his third was because Harry hadn't actually been allowed to. "We saw him during class," Harry defended, "and we had been really busy with schoolwork." "Your fingers should be safe," Remus smirked. "Well, this should be interesting," Sirius said honestly, as he'd never spoken to Hagrid on the subject. "I don't know if I'd call her a friend quite yet," James snickered. "Let's see if we can't find out her name. Then we'll move up to acquaintance," Sirius agreed with a grin. "Least it didn't spit them back out." Remus chuckled at Harry's previous suggestion. "I can't imagine why they'd leave," Lily said in surprise. "They wouldn't ship them all back and leave the one on their own, plus I'm under the impression they're sleeping in how they arrived." The boys either nodded or shrugged as they got their confirmation. They hadn't really been too worked up about the answer. "Oh yes, I'm sure that was the reason," Remus chuckled. James began, but Lily quickly read out what had Harry looking just as shocked. "No, no." Sirius began waving his hands frantically to make sure Lily didn't try to avoid the subject as well. "You most definitely comment on this. So, I think Hagrid's trying a new look," Remus said mildly. "That about covered it," Lily agreed, looking like she was already going to turn back to the pages. "Must be joking." James was now ogling the pair as much as the book. "How can you not want to talk about this?" "Leave Hagrid be," Lily gently scolded. "It's not like it's a real mystery. Clearly Ron's not the only one who's been fetched by the French arrival." "There's no sense in laughing at him about it," Remus agreed, though his twitching mouth made it clear he was trying his hardest to follow his own advice. James and Sirius exchanged pouting looks, but decided against arguing with the pair about it. Perhaps they needed to convince Remus to move. He was clearly getting too chummy with Lily over there agreeing with her so much of late. Lily grimaced in disgust. Maybe she would prefer to talk about Hagrid. Oh no, Harry muttered with every last drop of sarcasm he had. Those boys are so lucky they have Hermione around. Lily huffed, rolling her eyes at her own boys, who were clearly still muscling down anything they wanted to say about it. So close, James said with a snap of his fingers that coming out a beat too off from normal, but still rolling far easier than his previous attempts, so all of them pretended not to notice. Well, maybe next time, Sirius offered. Oh, I'm sure all the staff is, Remus agreed. They just have to show it a bit less, Lily nodded. You weren't supposed to talk about Fluffy either, and yet, James rolled his eyes. Harry gave his dad a nudge for that. They'd all admitted they weren't going to hold that against Hagrid. Now where was this attitude in your first year? Lily couldn't help but mutter an agreement with James. That gave all four of them an odd pause, as two of them realized they hadn't reached this age, that they should have been alive to be as impressed with this as Hagrid. They hadn't ever really forgotten per se, but it was a bit of a smack in the face all of a sudden to realize otherwise. Remus said with genuine concern. What kind of beef? Sirius began slowly. Lily shook her head to indicate she hadn't the faintest idea, before continuing if looking a little green around the edges, causing another round of snickering at that lovely reminder. Well, there you have it, Sirius said in absolute triumph as he smirked at Lily. You know Hagrid would get behind anything that was being repressed, and yet here he is. Lily sighed as she ran her hand through her hair, still wanting to do some research of this on her own, but for now finally deciding to hatch away whatever her problem with Sirius was on this particular subject, as she was so clearly outvoted. She must be missing something. There's the odd one in every bunch, Remus muttered, thinking he classified under that. Most werewolves purposely set themselves away from society, never even bothered to try and get wands or make an effort to be around people unless it was for some gruesome ulterior motive. Remus' parents had tried to do that to him for most of his younger years, until Dumbledore had arrived and convinced them to try otherwise. Who knew what would have happened to him if they hadn't? Maybe he would have turned out like the others of his kind out there. It really should be telling her something that she can't get one person older than her behind this, James pointed out. Hopefully she'll realize she needs to look into what she's talking about a little more, Sirius agreed. Oh, Lily cooed, that's adorable. So you get to say how nice it is he's doing that, but we can't compliment his hair, James pouted. As if you were going to, Lily shot back. Presumptuous and hurtful, Sirius Mark pouted, pressing his hand to his heart, which still didn't cover the grin that made it perfectly clear Lily wasn't wrong. Well, he did just get caught washing in a water barrel, Remus chuckled. I'd be red too. Oh, now you know he's in deep. Sirius couldn't suppress a giggle any longer. Poor blokes over the moon, James sighed, giving his own adoring look to his wife and child. Lily blushed slightly in shock for a moment, but couldn't deny her pleased tone as she kept going. Ouch, Remus winced on the kid's behalf. I felt so loved right then. Harry rolled his eyes indulgently, not finding it in him to be too mad at Hagrid for this. Thank you for that wonderful observation, Cupid, Lily giggled, causing all five of them to crack up laughing. It wasn't really that funny, but the fact that this was Ron's first comment caused the reaction to burst out of them. Lily made an agitated little noise, despite the few things she'd seen, still wondering how much Crumb used his fame to get favor from his headmaster. I would have kept mine, Remus snickered. Glorious fashion statement it is. Same, they all murmured agreement, Harry with less conviction than he'd meant to as he was still fighting off something to do with this topic. Honestly, I would have had the feast after the champions were selected, James pointed out. Sort of a celebration to the lot of them. James' point, Sirius agreed. They would have loved that much more congratulating their champion. Merlin, who can actually look bored right now, Remus demanded of nothing, sitting on the edge of his own seat in excitement for this news. Dramatic, Sirius hissed under his breath in the most mystical voice he could offer, causing his friends to start snickering again. Harry couldn't help a bone-deep shiver, wondering why on earth he should enjoy these precious last few seconds. What on earth could be fixing to happen? The others did notice, but they were all convinced it was just Harry being as excited for this as them. Bully for him, Sirius chuckled, while all of them could only look mildly amused. It was Hogwarts they were really wanting to see, though the fact that the esteemed Quidditch player had been selected they couldn't deny interest of, as Sirius and James at least really would like to hear more about him. Well, he's clearly enthusiastic, Lily chuckled. Remus rolled his eyes, and he wasn't the only one. They were already rather agitated at Karkaroff's obvious favoritism of this student, even if they didn't have proof yet if the other appreciated it. Still, at least this time it was warranted. James let out a pitiful groan. Why did Hogwarts have to be last? Harry was relieved for only a moment as this name returned to him, though it only added to his wonder of why he'd think anything of the other school's champion. Even this brief distraction still didn't help with the terrible build-up he was feeling in the pit of his stomach, telling him he'd better savor his life now. "Oh, wow," Lily said in only mild surprise, only being able to garner up about as much enthusiasm for her as Crumb. Maybe even less so. They wanted to know the Hogwarts one already. Geez, Sirius rolled his eyes. "I don't know. Considering what was offered up, I'd be pretty disappointed if I didn't get in," James shrugged. The three marauders were wriggling with so much excitement it was getting hard for Lily to stay focused. They were all so intent on hearing who was going to represent their school, no one really noticed Harry losing a shade of color with every word. "Bollocks!" James and Sirius pouted at once, leaning back into their seats with pouting lips. They'd really been banking on Angelina. "Still better than Warrington," Remus sighed, his own mouth puckered slightly. "Oh, stop," Lily scolded them all with a snicker, "just because Gryffindor didn't get in. At least we know Diggory's a good lad. It's nice to know he'll be fair in this tournament. I've heard one too many stories about all the cheating that goes on during this thing." One of the marauders may have said something back, but then they finally seemed to realize one outstanding person hadn't spoken a word since he'd left Hagrid's, and all eyes turned to Harry to see him blinking spastically behind his glasses, his breaths coming out rather strangled, his lips trembling like he needed to say something, but no noise was coming out. The four of them exchanged almost frightened looks now, not one of them really wanting to comprehend what could be so bad about this. Their mind flickered back, and they suddenly remembered when Harry had first heard Cedric's name. At least this did explain some of Harry's behavior towards him. He would be worried about the Hogwarts champion in this dangerous quest, but this was still pretty bad for someone who was practically a stranger. Did something happen to him during the tournament then? It was all they could come up with to explain how their boy was reacting. Lily still hesitated, like she wanted to offer her son some comfort, but Remus waved her on with his own eyes watching Harry very carefully. They all knew by now it really was best to just push past and get to a new topic, rather than letting Harry linger on something too long that could hurt him. If Harry wasn't freaking them out so much, they all honestly might have joined in. Despite their initial teasing, they couldn't deny they were happy for the choice, even if it hadn't been their first pick. Aside from the fact that they would admit they liked Cedric on principle considering how he'd been told to act after that disastrous Quidditch match against Harry. It was just nice to see the Hufflepuffs getting so excited over something. Harry shivered so hard it made James and Sirius on either side of him startle. But while the two exchanged wide-eye looks, Lily still didn't want to stop until that look was off her son's face. Lily looked up expectantly, like she was hoping that now Cedric was gone and something new was happening, Harry might be getting better. But the opposite was happening. He was trembling non-stop now. His chest kept stuttering as his breaths hitched, and he clearly wasn't taking in a word as they all asked what was going on. Lily made to put the book down and go over to him, but Remus caught her and shook his head, looking imploringly at the book. Lily knew deep down it would be better if she just got whatever was bothering him out, but it didn't really get rid of her desire to be at her son's side when he was clearly so distraught either. She had to take a deep breath and one last protective look at her boy before she could finish. Oh, he's not. James couldn't seem to swallow, his eyes darting from Harry to the book and back so fast it was blurring out everything. One thought was running through all four of them. Why would the goblet being going off again? It was supposed to only do that 3 times, right? Harry sat there, too dumbstruck to realize there was no obligatory "what" from the rest of his family. HPHPHPHPHPHPHPHPHPHP, a lovely fan, Queen Paddy, pointed out to me that s'mores were only an American food back in Chapter 7, so I went back and changed it. But I just couldn't resist putting that in here now that I know. You know what I honestly would have loved to see, though, if this had happened? Don't get me wrong, the Cedric plot line isn't bad. But can you just imagine if this had happened to a Slytherin? I can still imagine Harry sharing the tip about the dragon with Warrington, because he'd still think it should be equally fair, even if he didn't like the guy. I like to think Warrington still would have paid him back with the egg tip, because he'll repay his debts, even to a Gryffindor. Then in the end, when Warrington still dies, it would just be the biggest slap in the face for all the Voldemort supporters to realize that their precious Dark Lord had killed a pureblood as a spare as readily from his own precious house as any. Don't get me wrong, I'm a proud Hufflepuff and love my house getting some attention in this book, but I feel like that would have been a huge impact, even more than Cedric's. I've been trying to figure out the Hogwarts school tables for ages, and I think I'm overthinking this. If you go back and read the passage from the first book where they're first being sorted, Harry lays out the tables for you. Facing the tables from right to left, it's Hufflepuff's table on the far right, and then from that table on it's Slytherin, Ravenclaw, and Gryffindor at the end. This makes sense, as Harry said several times he's had to pass every table to get to his own. Yet in the very next chapter, Harry says that he has to walk in between the Hufflepuff and Gryffindor tables. Did the tables switch, and this is a mess-up on JK's part, or am I misunderstanding something? My suggestion is loose at best, so if I've got this wrong somehow, please correct me. Chapter 18. The Four Champions. Chapter text. It leaves a bad feeling with me leaving these incomplete, even if the full version is up on another website. So I shall continue reposting these without the book text, even if it's not as good. At least it's something. Merlin's shit. I'm going to kill someone. Can't go one bleeding year. Got to be a way he doesn't do this. Maybe it was because of the way Harry was acting that hadn't left them so surprised. Maybe it was because by this point they were just so sick, but unsurprised at Harry being dragged into everything. But whatever it was, they skipped right to angered disbelief and began shouting at once of the injustice of this. Harry only half heard something going on around him. It just didn't seem real, and yet it explained what had been bothering him since Percy had brought this up over the summer. He did compete in this bloody tournament, and something went wrong. To hell he can't. Just put him back on the train. He can go stay at the Burrow for the year. Problem solved. Oh, hey, the train, Lily said with a sideways look at her son. He was still running his hand through his hair in a vain attempt at flattening it, his eyes vacant, and in no way showing he was following a word of what anyone was saying. When Lily just kept getting odd looks from the others, she got up to sit on the table in front of him, then leaned in close to Harry and tapped him on the shoulder, waiting until he fully looked at her before explaining. I just thought of a way Hogwarts would have gone to the other schools. They'd have taken the train. It is magical after all, so as long as it was given a destination, the tracks and a station would appear with the train as needed. Harry gave his mother a weary smile. Clearly, talk of this tournament wasn't actually making him feel better, but it was still nicer to think of that train going to some other school without him, where he wouldn't have even been involved. So he finally engaged her back by saying, "That's pretty cool, but where would the Hogwarts students sleep once they got there?" Remus didn't exactly look comfortable when he did. He finished with an attempt at a smile towards him. Remus returned it at once, the boys finally relaxing when they saw Harry was at least trying to act normal again. Lily said right back, "Magic, love. Those compartments could easily be converted to mini bedrooms once they arrived. It would actually be easier than squeezing all of Beauxbatons into that carriage. About as comfortable and roomy as the Durmstrang boat," James finally agreed. Sirius was still grumbling foully under his breath, glad that Harry was at least coming back around, but still unable to stop himself from pressing the point he'd been trying to make. Here's me agreeing, yes, that would work, but that's not the point now. Harry shouldn't have to be in this tournament. Someone set him up, so he should be able to leave school until it's effing over. Remus sighed, giving him a pitying look as he reminded, "You know as well as I do why that wouldn't work. Magical contracts are binding. You can't just pay a fine when you don't do it. Harry's name would be as bound as the other champions. If he didn't compete, something really bad could happen to him. His magic could be in danger. Merlin, I don't really want to know specifics because no one's ever broken one and lived long enough to say it." Sirius groaned, raking his hand through his hair so hard in frustration he was likely to pull out a few strands, and didn't care one bit. They all looked absolutely miserable, just so tired of hearing about Harry's life like this. This tournament was going to be dangerous. Harry was going to have to deal with even more terrible things than he'd already had to before, and that was saying something. James' mind kept flickering around, his face purely sour as he tried to come up with something else to say, but what came out wasn't particularly helpful. You know, I think I'm really starting to hate this holiday. Harry gave him a surprised look, but before he could even ask, he'd continued, it's apparently the day we're going to die. He only paused for a moment to grimace in disgust at that sentence. Your first year you got attacked by a troll, but that's the day Hermione and I became friends, Harry reminded, so I'm rather fond of that memory. No, I agree with your father. Lily huffed, ignoring the fact she'd always liked this holiday as her and James' anniversary for their first date. Now didn't seem the time to indulge this, because it also happens to be that same day Mrs. Norris was attacked, and that awful chamber mess happened. Plus that was the day Sirius apparently lost his marbles, Remus added. Sirius simply shrugged, having nothing to add to that but agreed, this holiday sucks. Harry really couldn't disagree that he didn't seem to have a very good track record for this particular day of the year. Still, looking around at all of them, he couldn't resist a smile either. For some reason, the mention of Hermione had made his mind want to flicker to something else, like he should be angry, but not at her, maybe one of his friends though. What would Ron and Hermione do that could actually make this feeling worse? It was such a contrast to watching his family now, so outraged on his behalf, they were all clearly stewing and trying to come up with some way to get him out of this. Still though, Lily did marginally relax as she watched her son regain his normal composure. Sadly, this only kicked up her anger at the situation another degree. She got to her feet and began pacing the length of the couch as she stormed. I still want to know how the bloody hell this happened to him. How did his name even get put in? Someone had to have done this to him. And why? What on earth could be the point of doing this to him? My money's on Moody, Sirius smirked. Harry only had the smallest moment to glance in surprise at his godfather, opening his mouth with that old look of something flickering in his eyes, when James snorted, giving him a sideways look as he told him, You know, sometimes I think your jokes are actually your mind trying to warn the rest of us how crazy you are. Sirius, grin widened. Of course he didn't mean it of the head aura, even if he was retired now, but it was making him feel better to at least pretend this was a joking situation. Well, look at it this way. Every single Dada teacher Harry's has had some interest in Harry. It's definitely in Moody's capability to pull off a stunt like this. Lily just sighed before saying, Can someone offer up a real solution before he starts accusing Ron next? Oi. Sirius pouted, but didn't argue the point, recognizing he wasn't making anyone else feel better by his picking. At least Sirius. Fun had turned off the harder question Lily asked. Why would someone do this to Harry? It wasn't hard to think up the reason. Their boy seemed to have more enemies than friends, it felt like, but it didn't really help them to start listing them. Top of their list was Voldemort, and by extension, any Death Eater he had at his availability. True, they only knew of one at the time, but he was off somewhere else, scheming something else. That did leave the nasty suspicion they had that there were two current Death Eaters around Harry at school, but as much as they hated Snape and had a very growing dislike for all the suspicions they already had about Karkaroff, it was mind-blowing to think either of them could pull this off under Dumbledore's nose. Their opinion of the headmaster was at an all-time low considering everything they suspected, and basically knew even if they weren't there to see it all, involving his hand in serious jail time. Still, that was the outside world. This was his bleeding school. He should be able to have stopped this from happening. They had no answers and no one to ask. Considering Lily had thrown the book to the ground and kicked it into the wall in her temper to take her shock and hatred of this situation out on something, James had to walk across the room to go and fetch the book. None of them had even marginally calmed down, but they did come to the same realization James had. This had already happened to Harry. He had lived through whatever they were fixing to find out, and that was the most important thing to them. Whatever came next, Harry had survived. James tried his best to steady his breathing so that when he found his right spot, he didn't keep screaming bloody murder about this. It was best he didn't anyways, because even in their shouting, Remus was the only one who hadn't gotten up in his outrage. still too sore and curled up into the chair with a very fussy baby now. His infant son's agitated whining at this mess only accented how the rest of them were feeling, though, so it wasn't exactly as calm an environment as he was trying for as he began. I feel like everyone in the hall wouldn't be looking at you if that were true, Remus grumbled low enough Harry couldn't hear. Sirius made a breathy noise, like he wanted to laugh at Harry's expense for that, but he couldn't really get it out. I can only imagine what she's got to say about this, James sighed. Hopefully something along the lines of, I know the perfect solution of how to get him out of this, Lily huffed. Harry sighed with pure misery. Somehow he just knew that was going to pop up a lot. It didn't make him feel any better that saying this to his two friends gave him an aching feeling, like one of them wouldn't even believe him. That couldn't possibly be true, right? I'd need more than a push to get my behind up there, Remus shuddered. Lily sighed deeply, shifting in her place and having to stop herself going over to her son, snapping at anyone for staring too long. This wasn't his fault. Honestly, this is one time I wanted him to get special treatment, put him somewhere else like the train home, James ground out. He didn't care how bad of an idea it was logically. He wanted someone to do something other than just stare at his boy. Be a little more worried if he was, Sirius mumbled. Harry was getting more despondent the longer this kept going, remembering all of those shocked faces and just wanting to scream that he hadn't done anything. Anyone want to place bets on when this is going to wear off? James moaned, just trying to say something that didn't depress him for just a second, though it clearly didn't work when everyone else ignored him. Lily had her hair wrapped so tightly around one finger it was beginning to hurt, but she didn't release the strands, just kept pulling harder in agitation of picturing her hair bare having to go through all of this. No, they wanted to make sure Hogwarts' mascot got shoved into this bloodbath as well, Sirius growled. All four of them looked at him like they were really going to do more than smack him this time, but when Sirius put his hands up in surrender meaning, he regretted his own joke. No one acted on it, no matter how much they wanted to. I still don't either, honestly, Remus snapped. Sirius plugged his nose to stop a snort of laughter, knowing he'd have loved to pick on both Harry and James for that any other time, as they were usually on the shorter side, even when they were the same age as those around them, but knew he couldn't have gotten away with it. Still, he regretted his missed opportunity the moment it passed, because no matter how stressed they all were for this, some humor really would have done them good for even a moment. No, Lily snapped at once. I do not care for 1 second what the bloody hell you think is going on, but this is not extraordinary or anything else. My son, she strangled herself off, her cheeks puffing up with indignation, but clearly trying to hold off another shouting fit that this was Bagman's first reaction. The others didn't look any better. Sirius in particular looked like he'd been smacked. What was Bagman playing at, trying to make this look like a good thing? Everyone should be trying to work on a way to get him out of this. Lily couldn't seem to stop herself constantly uttering the word no under her breath, and didn't seem likely to stop until something else happened. Remus gave an exhausted sigh at that declaration, still trying to work out in his head how this had been done. That goblet was one of the oldest of magical items. It would take something really powerful for it to have broken and spit out 4 champions. The question of who on earth could have pulled this off was still open-ended, though, as they had no actual suspects. I wish, Sirius sighed, though even he'd admit this was never funny to begin with. I almost envy the reaction, James groused. Well, she's got that one right, they all agreed. Ironically, that was only a rule this time around, Lily sighed, and still not my biggest problem. Really? Harry asked in surprise, the first time he'd actually tried to speak to any of them since his name had come out, so though Lily didn't look happy, she explained. I know you can handle a lot, love. I've seen that proven time and again. No, we, she quickly corrected, since all of the boys housed the same face she did, are so mad about is that you didn't volunteer for this. If you had, well, I can't say I'd be pleased, but Merlin help it. I can't pretend you haven't dealt with this dangerous mess before. It would have been your decision at least. No, the fact that someone put your name in, forcing you to do this, that's why I'm going to be putting someone in their place, she finished with a dangerous flash to those green eyes. Harry looked around in surprise, but when he saw nothing but agreement from the others, he felt a flash of warmth finally chase away that cold dread. No, he still wasn't happy about this situation he'd landed in one little bit. But the absolute fact that his parents were so infuriated on his behalf, not because they hadn't a shadow of a doubt he could handle this, but because he'd been forced into this, left him feeling almost giddy. James couldn't stop himself from smiling just a bit as he kept going now. At least his son finally looked almost back to normal now. Please stop saying that, though, Sirius pouted, not really exaggerating it much as he continued. The point is he shouldn't have to do this. Where's Dumbledore? Remus agreed with a heavy sigh. Maybe he could, I don't know, if the goblet was tricked once, can't it be convinced again to take his name back or something? You let us know if you figure it out, James huffed. If you put your name in, Lily stressed the word you, for emphasis like she was speaking to a 2-year-old. Harry didn't, so he isn't obliged to do anything. I think it's moments like this where I hate magic, Harry agreed. Why is Snape there? Sirius fired up at once, finally having something else to put his temper on. Everyone else, I don't care, but bloody hell, can he just not be there for 1 second? He has no part of anything going on. Merlin, he'll probably start a cheer squad for this happening to my pup. Malfoy'll be captain of that, James agreed just to finish the joke. He couldn't muster up an ounce of humor for it, though. Oh, that's what got through to you, then? Remus asked mildly. You want to insult a boy, you start calling him little, Lily agreed with an almost amused smile, which increased to actual laughter when indeed every boy in the room looked agitated at her. I can believe how scary that is, James nodded absently. Guess people really will be calling Hogwarts biased now. Harry rolled his eyes, thinking back when this had just been a recurring joke. He'd never expected this as an end result. Agreed, all 5 of them muttered. Yeah, I feel like you only would have brought one if you could get away with it. Sirius rolled his eyes. Lily's hand twitched, her face so murderous in that moment the others had to fight down the urge to duck, as she looked likely to draw her wand any moment and do something irreparable to Snape for saying that. She was as sick and tired of hearing about him as the others, seeming to regret every moment she'd ever stood up for him previously, as she could no longer even think about him without wanting to scream in his face for starters. James felt the exact same way, the murdering part, as he'd never pretend to stand up for Snivelus if his life depended on it. But he kept going with only the faintest hope Dumbledore would kick his slimy butt out of there before he could keep going long. James looked so furious by the time Dumbledore had cut in, Sirius, and Remus decided Snape should be lucky James hadn't ever managed to find some way to take a limb off in school, because he'd clearly do it now. At least Dumbledore didn't lose his temper on this, Remus huffed. I've never seen Dumbledore lose his temper over anything, Sirius sighed. It'd be really weird to even picture it. Lily made a murderous noise of disbelief in plain view for everyone to see. Would that work? Harry asked in shock. That was an even simpler solution than the aging potion. Aye, well, sort of. I can kind of picture it at least, Remus said with crossed eyes. If the goblet works so that it takes the essence of the person who put the paper in, well, it would be absorbing the person, not the name on the slip. So if another person wrote Harry's name down, and the goblet accepted that name to go with the person who put it in, well, I couldn't see why this wouldn't work. You'd really have to work on an older student to convince them to give up their chance for you, Sirius agreed in tones showing how impossible that scenario would be. What about a polyjuice potion then? Harry asked. You turn into someone physically old enough. If Dumbledore had the thought to set up against an aging potion, he'd most likely have done it against all potions. If you had one in your system, I don't think you could get through, Lily explained. Problem is, James ruffled up his brow as he sorted through this, what would be the point? No one would do that as a joke, because anyone who put their name in would want their own go at it. No one was suggesting this as a prank, Lily muttered with pure mutiny. Oh, he knows, Sirius sighed. No one here's pretending a student is powerful enough to do this to the goblet. Even Hermione couldn't get away with that. No, it would have to be someone at Dumbledore's level of magical power, and how someone managed to do that without Dumbledore realizing is still what's getting to me. Harry sighed. Clearly they were as lost as he on that front, so he kept at the other thing instead. At least that didn't explicitly have to do with him. But now I'm really thinking about this. Couldn't a whole school do that as a form of cheating? What if every single Durmstrang student just put down Crumb's name? That way the goblet would have no choice but to shoot out that name. His frown increased as he jumped to, what if it wasn't the goblet that was magicked, but every person at Hogwarts who just thought they were putting their own name, but really put mine? Though, he quickly amended when he could sense how wrong that was even without letting the others deny this. I guess that would be just as hard to pull off around Dumbledore. And wouldn't explain how Cedric got in, and a fourth name came out, James agreed gently. Still, they were all happy to at least have seen him try. It was good to see him trying to throw those kinds of things out there, as it meant he wasn't solely trying to rely on his mind for answers anymore, which only ever led to hurting him. I am going to rip his head off, Sirius said sincerely. Now she's just being ridiculous. Remus rolled his eyes. We've seen an abundance of evidence it stopped a number of students, so why on earth could Harry get around that? Can someone please stop blaming Harry and instead get to how he doesn't have to do this? James agreed. Thank you, McGonagall. Lily nodded sharply, happy at least someone was around to keep these idiots in their place. Well deserved, that, Sirius nodded along. Oh, no one's arguing this is irregular, Sirius rolled his eyes. Actually more surprised he hasn't spoken up by now, Lily said briskly. Put his bleeding opinion out in the open of all of this. No, Lily snapped again, sick of this being everyone's go-to answer. She was seconds away from getting to her feet and stomping her way to Crouch's house and telling him off next. You find a bleeding loophole and get him out of this. If there's a way around getting an underage student into the goblet, there should be a way to get him out of it, James agreed in seething tones. It was a rule an underage student shouldn't be in, Remus agreed with an ugly look in place. But then again, isn't Crouch the one who decides what rules should and shouldn't be followed? Harry looked at him in surprise at this. Clearly something had just gone over his head, but even though James agreed, he didn't notice Harry and instead kept going. I do not like him anymore, Sirius growled, any shine gone to be replaced by a murderous growl in his voice. Quidditch player be damned, no one should be in a good mood while this was happening to Harry. Lily opened, then closed her mouth, shutting her eyes for a moment before opening them and saying, actually, that seems fair. Wish I could say otherwise, James sighed, but the man's got a point. That doesn't solve our problem, Remus sighed, keeping the baby in his lap as close to his chest as he could, like he feared someone was going to wrench him away any second and throw him into this tournament. Harry's still stuck in the bleeding middle of this, but it might take some of the heat off of him if they do pull that off. No one looked remotely happy, but if this was the solution that everyone ended up coming to, it would have the benefit of Harry not being the sole attention anymore, at least somewhat. So tell it to do otherwise. Sirius snapped in outrage. It's a magical object. Use some effing magic on it and get it to do what it's told. You know, it's sad when I can't even say he's not wrong, Lily moaned into her hands, pressing her face so tight into them in frustration she was leaving nail marks on her forehead. I'd be just as bleeding pissed if this was happening from another school. Now why couldn't this one have been here this whole time instead of Snape? James huffed, thankful someone else had stepped in, hoping against hope whoever would find a way out of this for his son. Pretty sure he's saying what none of us want to hear, Lily mumbled, still not removing her face, her curtain of red hair hiding most of the act, and she didn't look likely to move until her hair bare was pulled out of this. And a number of other things, which do absolutely no good. Sirius rolled his eyes in pure contempt. If I could have a go at the goblet, I'd be doing it now as well. He's actually got a point there. Remus raised a brow at him. You haven't spoken a word. I kept hoping someone would find a way to get me out of this. Harry shrugged, choosing not to add on he hardly ever liked speaking when adults were around discussing him. Probably one too many years of the Dursleys had put that into him. They always somehow managed to make it clear if Harry's name was in the conversation he should keep his mouth shut, not that they ever included him in any other discussion either. Besides, he finished out loud to get rid of his trailing thoughts, couldn't think up anything to say. I hadn't done anything. Oh, please don't say that, Lily sighed, finally raising her head to give a stank eye at the book. This French girl continued to agitate her the longer she spoke. That's why I didn't want her to say that, she snarled when James got that out, looking more than a little sick after doing so. Sadly, they'd already realized this, but with any luck maybe Moody would suggest someone who could have done this to Harry they hadn't thought of. Finally, an expression that doesn't read, "Oh, this is brilliant," Sirius snorted. Oh, how I wish he was wrong, Lily hissed. And how do you spend your mornings? James snarled. Moody and McGonagall were the only ones sticking up for his son so far. He wasn't going to let someone have a go at them without returning. In fact, maybe you should start that practice. Logic, Remus raised a brow. Common sense, Sirius agreed with a sigh. Something any adept person would know, James sniffed. Harry felt something just as cold trickling towards his stomach, for the first time wondering on Karkaroff at what he'd said, and for an inexplicable reason going back to Sirius' earlier joke of who'd done this to him. I'd be worried if you did treat him like me, Sirius agreed with an ingenious smirk in his opinion, and when Harry snapped out of whatever that face was and laughed, it was worth it. Well, there's our proof, as if we needed any more, James sighed. Karkaroff was, or is I guess, depending on what time we're talking about, a Death Eater. Never heard of him before, though, Remus gave an absent shrug. So either he's not very high in the ranks or hasn't joined yet. Or we've gotten a spot more dodgy information, Sirius scowled, for the first time really thinking past that rat's betrayal and jumping on the fact that it wasn't just James and Lily he got killed. How many more people would that rat get murdered for Voldemort? How soon until he started telling Death Eaters their plans instead of them figuring out theirs? The others were confident they knew where Sirius' mind had gone, but they were already in a foul enough mood without something else like this being brought up just now, so no one asked him for details. That managed to snap James onto something far more pleasant at least, as he began giggling at once, managing to get out. It took you how many months? Before he broke off into a bit more chuckling. Harry rolled his eyes good-naturedly, but none of them had seen that eye in person. If they had, they wouldn't have questioned him using that as a name either. Oh, but it would have been so much more interesting if it was, Lily agreed mildly. No, Lily snarled in outrage, this time joined in by everyone else as Harry watched. It was his mother, though, who kept going in a full-blown, no-longer-rubble-to-bottle-it-up tangent as she really did get to her feet, pacing the length of the room in a towering outrage. I am so bleeding sick of seeing him just say, okay, Harry's going off to do this insane thing, let's see what happens. Remus opened, then closed his mouth as he couldn't come up with an argument for that. The only time he may have tried for some defense was in Harry's second year, when Dumbledore hadn't even been around there at the end. But even still, with that odd advice he'd given indicating he'd known Harry was around, he hadn't offered words of caution trying to deter Harry. He'd instead said the very thing Harry had repeated in calling Dumbledore's bird to him. Coincidence? Maybe, but as this was the fourth time it felt like Dumbledore was in no way hindering any of this happening to Harry, he couldn't really believe it as much anymore. James and Sirius exchanged a look that spoke volumes, but honestly felt the exact same way as the other two. Dumbledore had abandoned Sirius when he needed him most, and they'd never forgive him for that. They even suspected he had a hand in convincing Remus Sirius had done all of those terrible things. He was the only one who could have done such a thing to make Remus think the worst of Sirius. Harry felt something crumbling inside him, though he realized it was already cracked beyond repair anyways. This was just more coming out. He knew in his younger years he believed Dumbledore could do anything, but now because of last year, and now this, he knew that illusion would never come back. Still, James kept going, which did not make one beat of Lily's pacing skip. She kept stalking back and forth, wearing out the carpet like that would somehow help. That's true, James grumbled. Everyone else has been doing nothing but complaining, but I haven't seen one bleeding person actually trying to offer up a solution. Sirius started grinding his teeth to fight back the urge to snarl a few more death threats at someone he never believed he'd direct them at. What's got him so distracted? Lily raised a brow in surprise, finally stalking to her seat, though it wasn't making the situation any better. What on earth could be going on that's demanding more of his attention than this? Harry sighed, that old feeling returning, making him sure that he knew an answer at some point, and he wasn't too eager to learn this one. I would feel bad for him, Remus sniffed, if he deserved it. It's his own fault for firing his help and acting like a prick to everyone he doesn't deem worthy. All five of them gave a few terrible mutterings, still wishing more than anything Harry's name wasn't in that they could be hearing about this like Harry should be through the rest of the school amongst rumors and in the stands. Now they were going to have to hear what the Triwizard decided daring was, and Harry would be in the middle. Well, Ron was right, Harry huffed without a trace of humor. I've lived that part. None of them looked remotely pleased about it. Right, I can see that happening. Remus rolled his eyes. As opposed to the other challenges, are they going to take their wands away? Sirius rolled his eyes, though he shuddered at the thought, not even wanting to imagine that kind of horror. Finally, the bright side, James sighed, sounding like that was still the worst news in the world. He'd give anything for Harry to be taking those stupid exams rather than this. Well, how does that work, though? Harry asked. Everyone else would be in 7th year. They'd have to take their NEWTS, right? I feel like winning the Triwizard Tournament is your job application. Sirius rolled his eyes, and Harry realized he wasn't really kidding. With the amount of fame and prize money this came with, it really wouldn't be difficult to find a job with those standards behind you, and you had plenty of time to look. Guess he really does look bad. Lily rolled her eyes, unable to find it in herself to actually feel anything for it. It felt like compensation for some of the more ruthless laws he'd been passing of late finally catching up to him. Sirius finally managed a real smile this chapter, sad that he couldn't do more at that joke. Didn't know there was such a thing, Lily said, still more grimly than with any amount of humor, but at least they were trying again. If there was, Percy would hit it. Remus attempted a smirk. Good to know he's not too sick. James rolled his eyes. Can't even blame them, Harry sighed. Don't need a translation for that, Remus grumbled. Crumb didn't say a word during that, Sirius realized in surprise, somehow actually thankful at least one of his Quidditch fascinations this year hadn't managed to tick him off yet. You'd think he'd be just as outraged as Fleur, James nodded in agreement. He was making a lot of the same faces as Cedric, Harry shrugged, switching between surprise and confusion, maybe some contempt in there. I still want to strangle him with his own beard, Lily snarled. Smiling at a time like this, can't someone at least pretend to be upset? I think we're doing that enough for all of them, love, James sighed. I'd listen to 100 Quidditch matches over this, Lily groused. If Harry didn't tell them, what the bloody hell makes him think he'd admit it to him? Sirius snapped. He's not any more special than those arse wipes, James agreed. Harry gave a mild frown at them both, finally understanding why he would have felt so agitated at Cedric this year, as he was sure once the shock wore off, he'd look at Cedric as a rival again. It still didn't explain that other feeling, this want to defend him and not hear a bad word against him. Considering the last time he'd felt this was towards Darby, and he'd made a few attempts at making Harry's life hell, he didn't feel like sharing that this time. Any feelings he would have anyway slipped away at once as his lips sneered in protest along with the others, outraged at once no one believed Harry about this. Harry's breath released in a sudden rasp, looking like someone had just kicked him when he was down. They all thought it was just lingering agitation at what Harry was thinking, though. Even Harry himself had no idea why he'd felt anything for that. So did every other person at that school, Remus snapped, and if they say otherwise, they're bleeding liars. I'd be a little more concerned if you did think I'd enter, Sirius said at once, none of his usual humor in his favorite joke, but meeting Harry's eyes anyways with a spark of amusement nonetheless. Harry managed a sour-filled smile for him, but not because the joke had quite worn off yet. He was just a little too distracted still to really give the laugh. If someone really thinks that, they need a dictionary, Lily scowled. Now, I don't think that's really all fair, Sirius sighed, still trying his hardest to get a smile going. Give yourself some credit. No, Harry said back deadpan. So far, I think he's actually been the perfect amount of paranoid, James said with a shrug. I hate that I know the answer to that, Remus scowled. Well, that's not entirely true, Lily murmured, shrinking just a little closer to Remus and her son. Thank you, because I hadn't remembered that recently, Sirius scoffed, his two dark eyes still trying to keep Harry's, to show he didn't really blame his pup for thinking about this. The portraits are the biggest gossips in that school, James muttered randomly, his mind happily latching onto anything old and familiar. Timing, Remus rolled his eyes, missing the time where he would have laughed at the fortune of this password happening in relation to this. Sirius groaned into his hands, wanting to laugh along with the twins like he always had, but wanting to smack them a good one for not giving Harry a chance to explain himself because he hadn't done this. Never thought a celebration would depress me so much, Remus grumbled. And not one bleeding one of them got the picture that you hadn't, Lily seethed, wishing Harry would shout it in someone's face already. He was so clearly upset and frustrated by this. James was opening and closing his mouth, clearly having reached the level of too outraged to speak on his son's behalf anymore, so forced himself to keep going in hopes Harry would just leave. "No, I am," Sirius muttered under his breath, more out of obligation than anything at this point. "About bleeding time," Sirius huffed. "Where were Ron and Hermione in that mess? They should have been there to at least try and keep that horde off of you." That's his response. Remus rolled his eyes. "Hello." I would have thought he and Hermione had rehearsed another conversation to try and calm him down. "What?" Lily balked, sure she'd heard him wrong. James didn't answer, though, didn't even glance up as he kept staring down at the pages, getting a very bad feeling about this. Awkward silence, Sirius muttered into the room, which had somehow joined the same atmosphere. "Please tell me he was being sarcastic," Remus demanded, a furious glint lighting his eyes. "I am begging you to tell me, James, that there was some sarcasm in there." James did not respond, his face going slack and pale the more words he kept pressing out. Why would he? What Lily tried to stammer out, her face growing steadily more red the more she couldn't snap out a question. "He would have told you if he had." Sirius howled in outrage, the shock finally wearing off, and he began trembling with rage. "How can Ron, of all people, think you'd done this? He's not heard a word from you, and he's really saying you did this." Harry's mouth was left hanging open, the expression of mingled fury and disbelief still not quite covering the hurt that was quickly rising. Something had been trying to warn him of this, but even with it resurfacing clear as day, Harry didn't want to believe it. He'd always known Ron had some jealousy issues, but this. He now couldn't decide what hurt worse, someone putting his name in the tournament or his best friend treating him like this because of it. "Sadly, I can believe it's accurate," Lily hissed. "I wouldn't tell him the truth now if he begged me," Remus sneered with as much fuel as he could. "Not the way he's acting." "Letting him," James repeated crossly, his voice still coming out too quietly, though. He hadn't quite seemed to get past his own disbelief at the situation yet, and was still flawed on that. "Oh, I'm long since past angry," Sirius growled, entirely sick of this whole bleeding school treating Harry like this. Now someone who'd supposedly been a friend had joined in. "And you once thought you could turn a rat yellow with a spell a 3-year-old knew wasn't real. You don't see him holding that against you." Lily half shouted, a muscle going off in her jaw she didn't seem aware of. "Could have fooled me," Remus snarled. Remus made a noise of pure outrage. He hadn't believed he could be more disgusted with the situation Harry was in, and here was Ron of all people proving him otherwise. The baby in his arms began fussing, and Remus was having a very hard time settling him back down when he couldn't even pretend at that emotion himself anymore. James slammed the book shut with a sharp snap. "A lot of you suggested the train as an option, so I'm not going to single any one person out because I love them all so much, but thanks again for the offer. The more I thought about it, the more I realized what a cool idea it was. Sorry if I came across as a jerk to anyone for my initial turn down of it to anyone. Come on, you know I had to make a joke about that." This and one other are thrown around all the time to Kingdom Come about a plot hole in the series, and I'm sure you all know what the other is, and I'm already working on a far better explanation for it, but for this one in particular, yeah, I couldn't really come up with anything. Magic can be outwitted, as has been shown, but in this particular instance, I think Sirius said it best. Just because it could have happened doesn't mean anyone could have been talked into getting away with it. All that prize money and glory couldn't have been talked onto my slip of paper.